Hi, Echo.
Madam Chair, you'll be good to go right at 7 BEC TV. Tom's having a little trouble getting his feet up, but we're ready to go right at 7.
Fifth, 2021. It is 7 p.m. The school board meeting tonight is being conducted remotely via Google Meet. It is being live streamed by BEC TV and will be replayed per the usual BEC TV replay schedule. Please consider that while most of us in this meeting or viewing this meeting are not in the same room, all of us, wherever we are in Bloomington or the metro area, are on the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary land of Indigenous people. Bloomington Public Schools rest on Dakota land ceded in the treaties of 1837 and 1851. Okay, let's start with a roll call. So all board members present, please say aye or here or present. Director Beebe?
Here.
Director Bennett?
Here.
Director Olson?
Here.
Director Sorum?
Here.
Director Steiga?
Here.
Director Starks?
Here.
And I am here. So all board members are present today. Now we'll move to the Pledge of Allegiance. So please join me in the pledge. Do we have our flag? Director Beebe always has it ready. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, so next in our agenda, we have approval of the agenda, and I'd like to move approval of the agenda.
Second, Steiga.
Thank you. So it was second by Director Steiga. All those in favor of approving the agenda tonight, please say aye. Director Beebe?
Aye.
Director Bennett? Director Bennett?
Aye. Did you not hear me?
No, I didn't.
Oh.
Director Olson?
Aye.
Director Sorum?
Aye.
Director Steiga?
Aye.
Director Starks?
Aye.
And Corman, aye. So the agenda has been approved. Next, we have recognitions. And the first item that we have on recognitions is the Professional Recognition Week Proclamation. And I would like to call on Jennifer McIntyre, Executive Director of Special Education.
Thank you, Chair Corman, members of the school board, Superintendent Fujitaki. It is with great honor that I have tonight to be able to recognize our paraprofessionals. At this time of the year, last year, Governor Walz had sent out a proclamation to the state of Minnesota, making the proclamation that this week is going to be known as recognition for our paraprofessionals in our school district. I'm going to actually read components of the proclamation and then a short statement about our fantastic paraprofessionals in our district. So the proclamation from the state of Minnesota reads as, Minnesota is home to more than 20,000 paraprofessionals, providing services in multiple settings within schools, including support for instruction, student activities, and individual students, as well as numerous other tasks that contribute to educational success. And whereas the support and services provided by paraprofessionals are integral to student achievement, resulting in even better or more effective Minnesota schools. And whereas the state of Minnesota and the Minnesota Department of Education are committed to excellence in education and recognize the important role of the paraprofessionals play in ensuring educational success. And whereas the Minnesota Department of Education will celebrate the contributions of paraprofessionals during Paraprofessional Recognition Week from January 25th through January 31st, 2021. For me, it's a great honor to recognize all of the dedicated and amazing paraprofessionals who provide services to our students and families within Bloomington Public Schools. Our paraprofessionals provide supports to students from the minute they get off the bus or log on to their class in the morning, or the minute they leave our schools or log off of their class or Google Meet for the day. Many of our paraprofessionals connect with students outside of their classes to see how they're doing and if they're attending classes. This is especially true during this time of distance learning and for students who have started coming back into our schools. Our paraprofessionals have learned right along with our teachers, staff, and students how to navigate Google Meets and how to provide support to our students and their families remotely, always working to keep all of us connected. A week to recognize all of the wonderful work of our paraprofessionals seems to not quite represent the everyday commitment, support, worry, and true service that this amazing group provides to our Bloomington community. I would like to thank our paraprofessionals for each and every day that they provide support, guidance, and are a warm, compassionate connection for each and every one of our students. This has been essential during this time of distance learning and navigating through re-entering our schools. Thank you, and thank you for allowing me to honor them during this week.
Thank you. And we actually have a resolution in front of us here for Paraprofessional Recognition Week. So could someone read it, please? Director Olson.
Be it resolved that the School Board of Independent School District 271 honors the proclamation from the Governor of the State of Minnesota recognizing January 25 through January 31st, 2021 as Paraprofessional Recognition Week.
Second, Steigoff.
Thank you. Any additional comments? Okay, let's move to vote. All those in favor of approving this resolution, please say aye. Director Beebe?
Aye.
Director Bennett?
Aye.
Director Olson?
Hi, I didn't say a comment, just that I've enjoyed working with paraprofessionals even today as a substitute teacher.
Did you say aye?
Sorry, aye.
Director Sorum?
Aye.
Director Steigoff?
Aye.
Director Starks?
Aye.
And Corman, aye. So this proclamation was approved. Thank you, and thank you to all of our paraprofessionals for your hard work and dedication. Okay, let's move to we got recognitions of student school board representatives reports we have along with that. So we have here today, once again, our two student representatives, Tristan Pai and Juma Waganda. So whoever wants to start first, go ahead. Thank you.
Hi, I hope everyone's having a great evening today. So as I start off my student report, I want to start off with winter sports. Thankfully, we're able to get winter sports up and running. They're running well, taking proper COVID precautions. I have a couple scores actually with our boys hockey losing in a close match in overtime against St. Louis Park, 5-4. Great game, boys. And our girls basketball team winning their first game of the season, 59-45 against Washburn. Congratulations, ladies. Our swim team lost a close competition against Benilde, but in all, we're just happy to have these winter sports up and running and letting everyone compete and have fun. I know it's harder with these times. Especially with our student government, we're trying to lift the morale and spirits of students we're having an upcoming virtual spirit week, which would also be followed by events during out the week, including a movie night, a virtual trivia night, and a virtual talent show. With our main goal with student government, we're just trying to bring the camaraderie and community feel back with the students. I know it's hard to get in touch with a bunch of friends and just losing a lot of the social life, I guess. And with our NHS and study go groups throughout the month, we've had numbers and a lot of amounts of students head to Feed My Starving Children this month just to volunteer, get some volunteering hours. So shout out to all the students who have been volunteering this month. And my last message is be happy, take proper COVID precautions, and thank you.
Awesome. Once again, I'm Jim Muganda. I'm the student representative for Jefferson, and a little bit more has been happening, just like Tristan said, since winter sports started. Girls and boys basketball have been going really well, and same with our competition cheer. And then for girls and boys hockey, they're just happy to be back on the ice and happy to have fun. Both girls and boys have won one game. Girls have won 4-2 against Chaska Chan, and boys have won 7-2 against our rivals Kennedy. So that was really exciting. The Jefferson Theater Company is working on a live show called Radium Girls, and they're planning on also hopefully having their spring musical. And I know that they've been taking a lot of precautions just to hopefully ensure another show this season. And then DECA, our business club, just had their first online districts competition, and a lot of the DECA chapter at Jefferson made it to state, which will be in March. So I'm really proud of them. And above all else, for students and staff and teachers, it's obviously been a pretty difficult time for me personally, and peers around me, we're struggling. And I know that for a lot of students, getting work done or, even getting up in the morning can be very energy draining and exhausting. But I guess we're just really hoping for a better spring, and I encourage everyone to keep your heads up high. Something that I wanted to talk about was today in our Bloomington Student Advisory Council meeting, we talked about a lot of things, but one of the main things that stuck with me was to be grateful for the little things, such as seeing your family, even though you're with them 24/7, they're next to you, that's a really big privilege. Or Tristan said, seeing the sunshine outside is something that we can really appreciate. And I think that being thankful for the little things can make life a lot more positive with the circumstances that we're in. So I encourage everyone to do that, and keep wearing your masks. Thank you.
Thank you both, and thank you for bringing this report and telling us more about what the students are doing in both of the schools, our high schools. And, just as you say, be thankful, and we are thankful for all of you, our students. And we understand and recognize that this is a very difficult time, and it just keeps getting harder and harder. And with winter on top of all, we're all looking forward to the very warm days and shiny days, and those days will come. So I want to say thank you to you and all of the other students for being so brave and for being so resilient. You guys are awesome. So thank you. Okay, so next we have the recognitions of public. On the school board page of the district's website, there is a link for Bloomington residents, district staff, students, and parents to submit a comment to the school board. Submitted comments might be read during the recognition of the public portion of the meeting, providing that the comment is not related to topics on tonight's agenda, and guidelines outlined on the comment form have been followed. We will allow up to 15 minutes to listen to public comment that has been submitted prior to the meeting. If the board receives comments that exceed the 15 minutes, those comments not read during the meeting will be shared with the school board. Should there be no comments or only a few that take less than the allotted 15 minutes, the meeting will proceed. A reminder that the school board listens to public comment and does not respond during the meeting. Typically, matters are referred to administration. Mr. Kaufman, do we have any public comment for tonight?
Good evening, Madam Chair, Superintendent Fujitaki, members of the board and viewing audience. Tonight we have 3 submissions that are all covered by an agenda item this evening. So they would not be read under the current guidelines, but we will be responding to those 3 that submitted the comments. So I yield back the chair to you, Madam.
Thank you, Mr. Kaufman. Okay, so next in our agenda is approval of Part A of the agenda. Part A includes board business, contracts, agreements, and finance.
So moved.
There's a
Director
second?
Beebe.
Okay, it was moved by Director Steiger and second by Director Beebe. All those in favor of approving Part A of the agenda, please say aye. Director Beebe?
Aye.
Director Bennett,
Aye.
Director Olson,
Aye.
Director Sorum,
Aye.
Director Steiger,
Aye.
Director Starks,
Aye.
and Corman, aye. So Part A has been approved. We're moving into Part B, and we will start with donations. Could someone please read that resolution? Director
Madam-
Beebe?
Madam Chair, Beth Beebe.
Go ahead, Director Beebe.
Be it resolved that the School Board of Independent School District 271 accepts donations as indicated in the background in the amount of $6,250. And do you need me to read them off?
I don't think so. I don't think we need
Okay.
to. Mhm. Is there a second?
Second, Steiger.
Thank you. Superintendent Fujitaki?
Great, thank you, Chair Corman, school board members, and viewing audience. Rod Zivkovich, our Executive Director of Finance, usually handles this topic, but he cannot be here tonight. Therefore, I will be speaking about this resolution. At board meetings, the board accepts donations from businesses, community members, and community organizations. Our district thrives because of the generosity of these donors who value education. We sincerely appreciate their support. The administration recommends the board accepts the donations of over $6,000. The list of donors and their donated amounts will be scrolled on your screens at the end of this presentation, of this meeting, I'm sorry. Back to you, Chair Corman. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any additional comments or questions for the superintendent? No, hearing none, then we'll vote. And thank you to all donors for your generosity. Director, all those in favor of approving the donations, please say aye. Director Beebe?
Aye.
Director Bennett?
Aye.
Director Olson?
Aye.
Director Sorum?
Aye.
Director Steiger?
Aye.
Director Starks?
Aye.
And Corman, aye. So this has been approved. Thank you. Next, in our Part B, we have building reservations facilities use guidelines during COVID-19. Could someone please read the resolution? See a hand. Director Olson, go ahead.
I have it before me unless anybody else wants a turn. All right, be it resolved that the School Board of Independent School District 271 approves the building reservations facilities use guidelines during COVID-19 when renting district space to outside groups. Restrictions are based on the state of Minnesota's learning model movement, using the number of COVID-19 cases per 10,000 residents.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second, Beth Beebe.
Thank you. And then we have Mr. Jake Winchell, Executive Director of Community Education. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Corman, Superintendent Fujitaki, and members of the board. Tonight, we bring you this resolution to approve the facility use guidelines set forth by our staff. One reason we have brought this to you is because it sets guidelines. These guidelines are more restrictive than the guidelines currently set by the state. If you remember back in December, our goal was to get children back into the classrooms and then keep them there. At that time, we had presented a plan that would call for a gradual reopening of facilities. And at that time of approval, we allowed only youth practices, and many other metrics were left as to be determined, something that we would talk about later. This latest plan ties our plan with the COVID case data, and also comes after consultation with both Bloomington Public Health and our own health services here at Bloomington Public Schools. I have Mike Larson with me tonight, our Building Reservations and Activity Center Manager, here to speak about the specifics of this plan. Mike, I'll turn it over to you.
Good evening, Chair Corman, members of the board, and Superintendent Fujitaki. So this plan ties us, as Jake said, to the cases per 10,000 residents. And if the number of cases is under 30 per 10,000, we would follow the published state of Minnesota guidance for all of the different events and activities and rentals that we have. And the rationale for that is that it would be our normal COVID-19 operating conditions. Between 30 to under 40 cases per 10,000, we would start to limit events. We would have no spectators, no events intended to create a public gathering. That would include tournaments. We would not have sports competition that brings teams from outside of Bloomington playing. And our auditorium rentals would be allowed, but without an audience. Groups would be able to stream or record their performances. Between 40 and under 50 cases per 10,000, we would have only Bloomington-based youth sports practices. No competitions or games would be allowed. And that would return us to the conditions that we operated under in June and in January. And if there were over 50 cases per 10,000, we would have a suspension of all building reservations rentals. The criteria for determining the cases per 10,000 residents would actually be the 14-day COVID-19 case rate by county that's published every Thursday by the state of Minnesota. And it would move us between the models. The interesting part there is that we would be tied to either Hennepin County or any 3 of the other 6 metro counties. Our events tend to draw people from all over the metro. And that is a pretty short summary of what we're looking at. I'll toss it back over to Jake.
Thanks, Mike. One of the questions you may have is how does this differ than how can the high school teams compete, and why are we doing something different for the youth teams? And as Mike mentioned, these are large scale events with teams coming from all over the metro area or beyond that, and also the spectator guidance inside like the activity centers is much more harder to comply with the spectator guidance, as we don't have the large bleachers as you do in the main high school gyms at both Kennedy and Jefferson High School. So I'm sure you have questions. I will turn it to you guys if you have any questions. Mike and I are here to answer those.
Thank you. Any questions? Director starts.
Well, I have several, so I'll do one, and then I'll have other school board members take their turn, and then you can come back to me. I don't know if Jake or Mike, if either of you could answer this. And just, I want to put on a personal note, Mike and I went to elementary school together with Jim Sorum's daughter. So there's 3 Oak Grove Elementary alumni in this meeting right here. So hi, Mike. So could you explain specifically what is more restrictive than the state plan? Is the whole thing across the board more restrictive, or just parts of it?
Mike, you want to go ahead and take that one?
Sure. So if the case rate was 30 or above, we would be much more restrictive than the state on the whole, depending on the actual case rate number. For instance, we wouldn't be able to do tournaments. We wouldn't have any events such as a church service that would create a public gathering. So we would be more restrictive than the state in that way.
Madam Chair, can I ask a follow-up? So the state plan doesn't have COVID numbers attached to their recommendations or requirements. They're just all across the board, across the state, in no matter where we are COVID-wise.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Sorum.
Yeah, the question I had was facility rentals. And that's what we talk about mostly. Rentals being for all groups, including BAA, churches, tournaments, other things like that too. So even rentals of, say, elementary schools for their gymnasiums for little gatherings or other such games of sorts, right?
That is
correct.
correct.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the question being that rentals, we don't have any free open gyms. Do we? Like if I wanted to take a couple of my grandsons and go over and just play basketball, I'd have to just stick around a 6-foot area within the basket hoop. Or that's not even allowed, right?
Mike, go ahead.
So that's correct, Director Sorum. we would have to operate our open gyms under our membership program. And currently the state for fitness centers and gyms requires a 9-foot separation between everyone who's on a basketball court, a walking track, or in a workout room.
Director Bennett.
Yes, thank you. So I was wondering, the resolution we passed in December, it called for the gradual reopening of facilities and following state guidance. So couldn't administration already limit that opening of facilities based on the gradual release? So if the administration made the determination that it's not safe to have a tournament, they already have, that's already within their power, because we gave them that resolution of gradually returning.
That's a great question. I think the intent of that original resolution was to eventually come back to you for all those other metrics that were listed as to be determined. Because we are more restrictive than what the state guidance is, that is the main reason why we'd like to bring it back to the school board for their approval.
Okay, well, because why I asked the question is because it kind of seems to me that we're going away from governance and into management. And that's why when we have the term gradually reopen, it's kind of a vague term. And I would hope that management, who are the experts in this realm, would make the responsible and safe decisions. Because if you ask me, well, how many spectators can be at a basketball game? I can't answer that question. That's why we have the facilities people. That's why we have the community, director of community ed to make those type of decisions. So I think that, at least my understanding when we passed the resolution, was that management would use their discretion on what to open and what to continue to restrict.
Sure. Yep, that's a great point. We would be prepared to make that decision if that's what you choose to do. It was just our intent to eventually come back to the board. But if you would like for us to make that call, we could certainly do that.
Jake, maybe I can speak to that if that's okay as well. For a while there, we were going through and analyzing every single event, rental, every single sporting event, anything that wanted to use our buildings outside of school. And as you can imagine, Bloomington has a lot of facilities that can be rented out, a lot of big areas with different events. And that is, it is a lot to go through each one with a fine-tooth comb, looking at guidelines, looking at what's appropriate, things like that. So what we did, and Mike spent a lot of time doing, is creating a guide for that. So you're correct in that we need to look at the events and make sure that they line up. And this what Mike is presenting you tonight is a guide around that. We also did that looking at the city of Bloomington, looking at numbers, looking at where we fall. Currently, Bloomington is having a higher case rate than a lot of our surrounding cities at the moment. And so we also looked at what the community was doing. So if you look at Bloomington Ice Garden, for example, they are more restrictive than a lot of other ice arenas in the area, partially due to size, the crowds we draw in, where people come from, things like that. And so I think what you're getting at is essentially what we're trying to do, just trying to create a guide for this and how we look at it and what would be appropriate given the case levels.
Well, if I may, what I'm kind of getting at is I don't want to set a precedent that every managerial decision has to come before the board before the decision is made. Kind of like we voted to resume in-person learning full-time for elementary, but we didn't say how many hours a day they're going to be in school. During that meeting, I had suggested that I would prefer maybe just if they were in 5 hours instead of 6 hours, but I didn't try to amend the resolution because that's more management, not governance. Kind of like there's regulations for lunch. If you can't, appropriately distance 6 feet, then you have to eat in your classroom. But we didn't vote on where kids are having lunch or where they're having specialist classes or the bus schedules or anything like that. That's all done by management. We're kind of the 10,000 foot in the sky. So to me, when we gave the permission for administration to resume facility rentals gradually and following state guidelines. It's to give them, leeway to make the responsible and safe decisions without them having to come to the board every time they want to do something.
Superintendent Fujitaki.
Great, thank you, Chair Corman. I'd like to respond to that question. The chair, the vice chair, and I have agreed, because COVID has presented so many new decisions for the board and administration to make, drawing lines about where governance and management starts and ends is very fluid right now. So I'm going to be meeting with the chair and vice chair to come up with criteria to help make that determination for future decisions. And hopefully we'll get that done. We have a meeting scheduled for this Wednesday to have that conversation.
And just as thank you, Superintendent, just as a follow-up on that, we're talking about, and we went over and over conversations with Superintendent and other members of the administration regarding this resolution based on the questions that that you had presented before this meeting. And obviously, yeah, it is attached to that resolution back in December, and it is a more restrictive model. So for that reason, it was decided that it will come anyway, but understand your concern about maybe the board needing to have those sort of conversations in a different meeting. So just as Superintendent said, we will have this conversation just to make it clear from now on who is going to be making those type of decisions that are related to COVID. It seems like it has not been completely clear, or that the board has not had a common agreement on that. So we will have that conversation. We'll be talking about that this week when we meet with the superintendent and the vice chair. Okay. Thank you. Director Starks, did you have another question?
I do. So just quickly, I want to respond to Director Bennett's concern, because I share the same concern as I've emailed out and shared with other folks on this board and administration. So that's not a surprise. Could Mr. Holman potentially just weigh in? So one question that I had, and then I want to get back more into the weeds, but this is more governance decision making. What is the effect of a no vote versus a yes vote when a resolution is in front of us like this?
So for my review of the two resolutions that you have, this one and the prior one, it looks like if you would have a no vote on this one, then what would happen is the district would be leasing or renting to outside groups based on the looser model that they use for in-house rentals.
Okay, so a no vote means that the district sticks to just the safe learning plan as published by the state.
Right.
And there would not be ability for the district to do a case-by-case basis of anything more restrictive.
Correct.
Okay. So can I follow up with another question, or should I wait, Chair Corman?
Let's see, does anybody else have any questions? Would like to have a turn? Any other board members?
I do. My understanding was that this is a guideline that was put together, which the administration did, and that we can approve or disapprove, and that's why it's in the form of a resolution. So it still gives us voice. And if we choose to have administration do everything, then we lose part of our voice. I don't see this as management, because I think I see it more as criteria for a larger problem that was existing when they were going case by case, and the cumbersomeness of it. And therefore they put together this tool to help.
Okay, I didn't see any other, Director Sorum.
Yeah, I would like to, I think Director Beebe had a good point. When we do these guidelines, as Hannah had said, you know, we have the cases per 10,000 and Nick isn't here tonight to give us any more, but it seems that Bloomington is running a little bit over 40. And I know there are other districts that are about the same. As we've compared to other districts, a lot of them in our metro area that we would be gathering with sports teams. And now we're talking pretty much inside sports with basketball and floor hockey and some of those things like that. Hockey seems to fall into a different setup, but I'm in favor of this resolution because of the guideline nature that we have right in front of us. And as soon as we get that information from the city, from the health department every week or every couple of weeks that they say we can do it, not to be an alarmist, but there's also the fact that there's variants of the COVID coming around too, and we keep hearing about more scare tactics from the media, social media, and whatever else, and so we're not really sure. So I think it's responsible for us as a board to make a decision for following these guidelines.
Thank you, Director Sorum. Director Starks, did you have another question? Go ahead, please.
So does this affect anything with our Minnesota State High School League sports and activities? And if it does, how does that affect those students? And if it does not, how does it differ from the MHSL guidelines?
No, Director Starks, good question. No, this is for rentals of our youth sports and other building rentals that are not high school league activities.
So Kennedy basketball plays Eden Prairie. They can still play at Kennedy's gym with the spectators and whatnot that's allowed under the Minnesota State High School League.
Correct. Yep. And there's some specifics on those guidelines, and Mike can speak to that a little bit on why it works better in the main high school gyms than it does in the activity center.
So Jake, what I think you're getting at are spectator numbers.
Yeah.
And the resolution in front of you wouldn't impact spectators at tournaments. Our tournaments, if they were to run, would follow the state guidance on spectators. So in our activity centers, for instance, we would be required to have 12 feet between spectators and participants. And unfortunately, if we were going to run 4 games per activity center, we can't meet that 12-foot requirement. So we have to combine our spectator numbers with our participant numbers. When you have a basketball tournament, you would generally have about 115 participants in the activity center at a time. And we have a spectator cap of 150. So it would only leave about 30 people to be spectators at the event.
Thank you. Director Starks?
I warned you guys ahead of time. I had lots of questions. So just really quickly following up with that, Mike, I just want to make sure I've got this, that I'm understanding. So under the state guidelines, you could run a tournament, but you'd have to tell the tournament coordinators, here's how it has to be run because of how our gyms are or whatever. And I know our auditoriums are actually larger than most other school districts. If I remember from my time on the Community Education Advisory Committee, learning about how lots of places want to come rent out our auditoriums because they're much bigger. So just following up, so you would, if you were to run a tournament, even under the under 30 guidelines, you would still have some restrictions that would be different in Bloomington than they would be elsewhere, just because of how our gyms are situated. Am I getting that right?
That is correct. It depends on the event, the numbers involved. For a tournament, it would be how many basketball courts they would want to use at one time. And we would follow the state guidance on that.
Okay. And then as a follow-up, do we know what other school districts if anybody else is going more restrictive in this type of model. Have you had a chance to connect with anyone in our area?
Yeah, Mike did a lot of research on that today, and a lot of them are following state guidelines. Some are not allowing any spectators. That'd be a school district that's got a setup similar to what we have, is that they're allowing tournaments but no spectators because they don't have the physical space. But there are some things that they are more restrictive on. Some don't use certain facilities. Some are requiring masks and shields. Some are just allowing youth associations to use the facilities. So we did do some searching today, and Mike did some good research on that and what some other school districts are doing. And we could always, we could alter the format of a tournament and make some of this a little easier to work with the distancing, but I don't know if the tournaments would work in our situation. Mike, is that correct?
So the tournaments like to run a lot of games at one time, and the only way that we could introduce more spectators would be by reducing the number of games that happen at one time. And most tournaments would probably choose to have the games run rather than have spectators.
Go ahead, Director Starks.
Okay, sorry, I'm probably on this tournament thing too much, but so that could though be up to the tournament directors. You could say, here's what we have to work with. You choose. Do you want more games or less games? No games, more games with no spectators, less games. It could be put in the tournament director's hands versus in the school district's hands.
Correct. Most of our events, they have an intention of what they want to accomplish, and we would work with them to do that within the state guidance.
Okay, thank you so much. I am done with my questions. Thank you. Appreciate all your help.
Thank you. Okay, not seeing any other hands up. I think we're ready to vote. So all those in favor of approving this resolution for building reservations, facility use guidelines, COVID plan, please say aye. Director Beebe?
Aye.
Director Bennett?
No.
Director Olson?
Aye.
Director Sorum?
Aye.
Director Steiger?
Aye.
Director Starks?
No.
And Corman, aye. That would be 5 votes yes and 2 no. So this has been approved. Thank you. Now we move to the next item in the agenda, which is the research evaluation and assessment update. And for this, we have today Dr. David Heistad, Executive Director of Research and Evaluation and Assessment, and Dr. Julio Sicily, Research Science.
Thank you, Chair Corman, Superintendent Fujitaki, Board Directors. We're pleased to bring you an update today on all 3 areas, the research, evaluation, and assessment projects that we're working on currently or have just completed. And I want to also mention that our department is held together by Kathy Torito, who's our district assessment coordinator, who manages all the logistics of doing assessment in Bloomington. And we also have 2 part-time research assistants from the University of Minnesota, Rick Lamb and Chin Zhao. And so we thank all of our colleagues for their incredible work this year. So I just want to start with a little introduction on how REA kind of fits into the district vision. And so we're very familiar with the pathways to college and career success with indicators at preschool ready, kindergarten ready, on course for elementary, middle school, high school, and then career and college. So REA has helped working with departments to come up with indicators for all of these various benchmarks, but also connections between the benchmarks so we can show how much progress students are making between preschool and kindergarten and elementary, etc. And so it truly is a strategic vision that has guided the development of the department and its continued evolution. On slide 3, you'll see a Venn diagram. This diagram was on my whiteboard if you ever came to visit me in my office, kind of looking at REA as a resource management piece of the puzzle, and then interacting with curriculum instruction, learning supports, and bringing research, assessment, program evaluation to the database decisions for each of these areas. Now, I kind of think of it now as if it were three-dimensional, and that these 3 areas would be like spheres, and they're all kind of interconnected. And at the core of the spheres is students and families. So we want to make sure that we're grounded in the kinds of decisions that help students and families, and communicating with families is very important. Then slide 4 is presents the topics that we're presenting on. We're going to be starting with Dr. Caesar doing GLDS. Then I'll talk about some preschool effectiveness evaluation. We'll switch to the development and use of school climate and SEL measures. SEL is social emotional learning. And then we'll have the impact of a program for helping students with math called IXL. And then I'll finish up with a few comments about MCA and MAP. I'll switch over to Julio now, and he'll take you through the GLDS.
Well, thank you, Dr. Hosted. Good evening, Madam Chair Corman, board members, Superintendent Fujitaki, and everyone else on this meeting. I will be presenting the graduate longitudinal data system that has been created here at Bloomington Public Schools, as well as some descriptive results using the system. And there are 2 main reasons why we created a database system such as the GLDS. One, we needed a system to measure college and career success for all our graduates from our district in order to continually improve how we prepare our current students for college and career success. And 2, to help administrators and teachers advise students about their PGPs. Now, the GLDS is made up of 4 components so far. First, the most important component is the SLEDS data. That is the Minnesota statewide longitudinal educational data system. The second is the K12 Bloomington Public Schools data. The third is the personal growth plan data. And the 4th component, and a fairly recent one, is the Hennepin County data. Now, all 4 components provide unique information that contribute to the massive GLDS database system. What are those pieces of information? Well, first, SLES provides us with post-secondary data of 11 of our Bloomington Public School graduate cohorts, starting with our 2008 graduates, all the way to the most recent data download of our 2018 graduate class. The data also contain workforce and wage data from the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development, that's DEED. DEED data alone provide us with over 15 million data rows. And that includes quarterly wages of all students in the state of Minnesota. Our K-12 BPS data consists of historical information going back to 2001, which include GPAs by grade, starting in middle school, of course, attendance, and test scores such as MAP and access scores that are not included in SLEDS. The PGP was designed to help students highlight their strengths and interests, as some of you know. Thus, we have collected data on career pathways, as well as mentor and goal setting information starting in middle school. And we are in the process of developing a partnership with another testing company to further expand our PGP data utilizing robust career interest tools. And lastly, as mentioned, a recent addition to the GLDS have been SNAP benefit data from Hennepin County. And these data go back to 1997 and provide us historical elementary information from our graduates. So far, we have some descriptive and information results that have been produced by the use of the GLDS, and some that I will present now. And I'm going to try to do this transition to the website. Can I just get a thumbs up if you see the website? Thank you. So the purpose of this information is to inform you how we are doing in meeting our goal to prepare all of our students for a successful career and college future. Now, I'll walk through some of these descriptive results to highlight the outcomes of our BPS high school graduates, especially results on attainment. The descriptive information from the GLDS has been broken down into 3 sections that you see here. 1, what do students do right after graduating high school? Their first steps. 2, for those enrolling into a post-secondary institution, including diploma or certificate programs, what attainment goals have they reached? So attainment. And 3, how are they doing in our economy? That is, what did our high school graduates who went straight into the workforce earn during the first year out of high school? And similarly, for students who went into a post-secondary program, what were their annual earnings the year after finishing their degree? To start, let's explore the path that our graduates have taken right after high school graduation. What we know is that consistently, more than 70% of our high school graduates have enrolled into a post-secondary program in the full semester of their high school graduation year. And that goes for our 2008, which you don't see here, just not to make it too busy, to our 2018 cohorts, 2017 cohorts, represented by the blue bars. So the blue bars is whether they enrolled into a post-secondary program. However, for our 2018 cohort, as you can see, the percentage of students enrolling into a post-secondary program dropped to 63.4%. In comparison, the percentage of high school graduates in the state of Minnesota enrolling into a post-secondary program did also decrease from 68.3% in 2017 to 66.6% in 2018. Nationally, on the other hand, there is an increase of 2.4% from 2017 to 2018 in post-secondary enrollment. One thing to note for our 2018 Bloomington High School graduates is that there was a difference of 4.7% of students going straight into the workforce in 2018 than in 2017. And this is represented by the red bars that you see here. 2018 represented the highest proportion of graduates going straight into the workforce right after graduation, going back to 2008 data. Similarly, in 2018, the highest proportion of graduates that were classified as other, which represent the category that includes graduates that did not enroll into a post-secondary program, and those who did not go straight into the workforce. Now, other also includes people who might have enrolled in one of the branches of the armed forces, since that information is not shared with the Office of Higher Education. The one powerful use of the GLDS is that we're able to look at specific subgroup information, including race, ethnicity, students of color, gender, special education status, English learner status, free and reduced lunch recipients, and as well as those who earned PSEO credits and those who took at least one AP exam during high school. For example, we are able to filter this information and look at the trends of post-secondary enrollment, workforce, and those in the other category for high school graduates who were in the FRL status. And as we know, FRL is a proxy for socioeconomic status. So if we're only looking at the subgroup of FRL, we see that a little more than half of our 2018 graduates of FRL status enrolled into a post-secondary program. A little more than a quarter went straight into the workforce, whereas close to 20% of them were classified as unknown. Further looking at this FRL group, we also know that those high school graduates of FRL status who took at least one AP exam in their high school careers enrolled at a higher proportion into a post-secondary program than those who did not take an AP exam. So this is the power that we can use when we use these filters to look at the data in a more precise way. For those who enrolled into a post-secondary program, we know the type of institutions they are enrolled in. That is a 2-year or 4-year private or public school, or if they went out of state. And again, we are able to filter down on subgroups and focus on what the types of institutions each subgroup enrolled in right after graduation. Our focus for tonight is on the next set of data. That is the educational attainment of our Bloomington Public School graduates. For these results, we follow the 2015 Minnesota statute, whose purpose sets a goal of 70% for post-secondary education, receiving a degree or certificate attainment for Minnesota residents ages 25 to 44 years of age by the year 2025. So it's coming close. What we know so far is that as of 2019, 62.2% of Minnesotans ages 25 to 44 have attained a post-secondary certificate or degree. We are happy to report that our 2008 graduates have already hit that 70% goal. And our 2009 graduates trailing just behind by 1.8%. Now, these attainment percentages do differ. If we look at race and ethnic subgroups, with our students of color trailing behind 15 to 40 percentage points, depending on the graduation year. We also note that our 2008 EL graduates are trailing behind by 16 percentage points. And these group differences continue on for later graduation cohorts. Similarly, our high school graduates of FRL status also trail behind the 70% attainment goal. Do note, though, that similarly to the First Steps data that we saw before, if we look at graduates of FRL status who took at least one AP exam in high school, the proportion of those attaining a post-secondary degree or certificate goes through the roof. Keep in mind, though, that the numbers of these students is fairly small, 17, 13, 22, and so on. However, as you saw, the number of graduates of FRL status taking an AP exam has gone up as we look at more recent graduation cohorts, topping at 71 students fitting the description in 2013, with 50 of them, that's slightly over 70%, obtaining a degree or certificate. The last piece of data that we'll attend to is the wage data from DEED. For our graduates who did not enroll in a post-secondary program, wages were calculated in two ways. The top bar graph shows the average annual wages earned starting in the third quarter of the year. So that is starting in July, right after students' graduation, and continuing on until the end of the quarter two of the following year. The bottom graph shows the average annual wages earned starting the first quarter of the year after graduation. So for example, for those students who graduated in 2008, the bottom bar graph represents the wages earned in the whole entire year of 2009. Now, note that there is no graduation cohort where their average annual wages met the Minnesota average livable wage, nor the Minnesota average minimum wage. In contrast, for those high school graduates who enrolled into a post-secondary program or institution and attained their certificate or degree, their average annual wages on the subsequent year after receiving their degree or certificate were well above the Minnesota minimum wage, as well as the Minnesota average livable wage. These average annual wages vary by the type of degree these graduates received, as we would expect, as you can tell here. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. As on the other graphs, we are able to filter by subgroups. And when we look at the average annual wages of graduates of FRL status, we notice that on average, these graduates are at a minimum making an annual salary over the average minimum wage. And for those who receive their bachelor degrees or higher, they're making well above the average livable annual wage. The last thing I'll cover of the GLDS results are from one of the many programs families from Bloomington and across the Twin Cities have access to that help their kids' explorations of career and academic pathways. As you all know, Bloomington Career and College Academy is a unique and innovative program that gives students the opportunity to explore or begin a career path while in high school. Students learn from college instructors, they earn college credits, as well as high school STEM and elective credits. Students from BCCA graduate ready to continue their education and training or ready to begin a career. Now, in order to analyze the impact of BCCA, we used a quasi-experimental design. Specifically, we used a propensity score matching algorithm. With that, the 61 students from the 2016 graduating class that were part of the BCCA program were matched with 61 students from the 2016 graduating class from the whole entire state of Minnesota. Now, this methodology helps in the selection of a match group that is identical to the BCCA in baseline variables, including socio-demographic factors, as well as ACT scores as an academic indicator. Meaning that the students from both of these groups are identical in demographic variables and academic achievement. The only difference is that the students from the Bloomington Public Schools were part of BCCA. We found that students in BCCA were more likely to enroll in a post-secondary program or institution, less likely to go into the workforce, and slightly less likely to be in the other group when compared to the state match sample. When looking at group differences, white students who partook in BCCA enrolled in a post-secondary program at a slightly higher rate than those in the state match sample. Slightly less of them went into the workforce, but similar proportions were in the other category. The differences between the BCCA group and the state match group was more stark when looking at students of color, where close to 15% more BCCA students enrolled in a post-secondary program, 11% less of them went into the workforce, and half of them more in the other category as to compare to the matched sample. BCCA seems to have a strong impact, not only on our white students, but especially for our students of color. Lastly, students who did not enroll in a post-secondary institution and those who went straight into the workforce reported making over $20,000 yearly wages. That is over the Minnesota average minimum wage, and about $17,050 above the average wages of the state match sample. Now, $1750 doesn't sound like a lot, but it's actually close to 10% more of the sample here. When we looked at the median wages, the differences between the two groups is actually larger. Now, as you can tell, we are at the beginning of utilizing these data to answer a plethora of research questions regarding high school completion, post-secondary attainment, as well as employment wages utilizing this GLDS. For the next presentation, I'll turn it over to Dr. Heisted.
Thanks, Julio. We'll have time for questions at the end, so I'll quickly go through an evaluation project that served to provide information between preschool and kindergarten. In preschool, we've got an assessment called the Minneapolis Preschool Screening Inventory Revised, which was created in Minneapolis when I was the director there. And then for kindergarten readiness, we've got the BECA, Bloomington Early Kindergarten Assessment. So this project really looked at doing, first of all, the MIPSI-R was created in English to start with, but then we created Spanish, Somali, and Hmong translations of the instrument. And we also ended up norming all of those groups. And over the winter break, I created 2020 norms that included over 30,000 students. So the primary purpose of the screener is to identify students who may need special ed services as early as age 3. And so that's been the primary purpose for Bloomington as well. But through this study, we found that it could also be used as kind of a pretest for evaluating how much learning takes place during preschool in our preschool programs and other programs throughout Bloomington. So what we did was created local percentiles and a score called a normal curve equivalent that could be used as a baseline. We correlated it with the MIPSI-R with the BECA and found a large correlation. So then we were able to do a beat the odds analysis of the effectiveness. Julio, I'm going to skip the next 5 slides and go straight to the correlation table. So the correlation between the MIPSI in this NCE units and the BECA, which I also converted to NCE, and that just means you normalize the scores so that they look like a normal curve, was 0.766. So that's extremely high for a correlation between 2 preschool instruments. So that really guaranteed that we could do this beat the odds analysis. And so in the beat the odds analysis on the next slide, we had 498 students with BICA scores who were matched with their MIPS-ER scores. And then in the prediction model, we included free reduced price lunch, EL status at kindergarten, gender, special ed IEP status, and racial ethnic status. And so with this kind of analysis, then the differences in the BICA after you've controlled for the pretest and the demographic factors we call a beat the odds analysis. This is similar to what we did with second grade math, where we found a teacher that was producing exceptional results at Olson Elementary. So the results, now also it's a lot of work on the part of staff at the elementary schools to identify which preschool program students were in when they come in with kindergarten enrollment. And so I categorized the preschool programs into 8 or 10 categories. And we see the average value added would be if students make exactly the amount of growth that you predicted. And it turned out that private preschools exactly hit the prediction. So their value added is 0. It doesn't mean that kids didn't grow. It just means they were the average preschool program in terms of growth. For students that had no pre-K experience, it was -6, which is almost a third of a standard deviation lower than you would predict. Then folks, and there were only 14 that were with friends, family, or home care, the value added was -5.12. Child care centers, -2.65. Then on the other side of 0, we've got our ELA program, which is sliding fee. And those students had a positive difference of 1.09. Early childhood special ed had a positive difference of 3.6. Head Start, we had 4 kids that were just coded Head Start, and they came from Minneapolis Head Starts, but they did well, 5.06. And then our voluntary pre-K program, where 113 students had both pre-test and post-test scores, they had a very high 8.12 value-added coefficient. And then the students at Pond and Southview had the highest overall value-added, more than 1/2 of a standard deviation better than predicted. So this then provides a methodology for doing future research where we can find matched samples, we can compare our programs to other programs, and we can give feedback to pre-K sites throughout Bloomington. I've got the individual names of all the private preschools. I could feedback how the students did in terms of growth from their preschool screening score to the BICA score. So this gives you an example of an evaluation project. It's also an assessment project. And I'm going to turn it back to Julio now to talk about our school climate indicators and social emotional skills.
Thanks, Dave. So next we have the fall assessment of school climate and social and emotional learning skills. Before we start looking at the results of the fall data collection, know that there are 5 skills that we collected data on. School climate, engagement, rigorous expectations, social cultural awareness, and teacher and school support. We'll look at specific items for school climate later on. These skills were selected with the assistance of Dr. Mitchler, Dr. Coyne, OE Director Dina Wade, and multiple school principals because they target social and emotional skills that we as a district can have a direct impact on. And with Dr. Mitchell's Save and Supportive Schools and Dr. Coyne's SEL initiatives, teachers and staff have received and are continuing to receive the tools to promote positive change in these areas. For the fall data collection, data were collected for grades K through 8 for the first 3 scales, for 5 out of 10 elementary schools. So that's Hillcrest, Normandale Hills, Olson, Ridgeview, and Westwood. With the respective principal's assistance, SEL questions were modified so that they were accessible to K through 2 students. So we primarily took part into rewriting questions so that they were accessible for our K through 2 students. Data were also collected for all 5 SEL scales for grades 3 to 8, and that's including all elementary and all middle schools. I'm going to talk about these results in a few ways. One, as you can see, we're going to take a look at the whole entire district's data results. Then we'll look at the results by site. We'll then look at how these results differ by racial and ethnic subgroups. And lastly, we'll look at the school climate data questions by grade groups. And that's K through 2, 3 to 5, and 6 through 8. And we'll focus on school climate because school climate is the area that schools are targeting for their site improvement plan goals. And we know from educational researchers that school climate is directly associated with academic performance and also college aspirations. With that said, here are district results for all 5 scales. The percentages for these scales that you see on your screen are calculated by counting the number of students that choose the top 2 answer options for each item of the scale. For some grades, the lower ones, K through 2, it would probably be the top answer option. So for example, one item in the engagement scale asked students how excited they were about attending their classes. The answer options range from not at all excited to extremely excited. The number of students who answered extremely excited and quite excited were then added together, and their sum was divided by the total number of students that answered that item. So for engagement, we know that 53% of students selected the top 2 answers out of all the questions that are asked in the engagement scale. The overall results show that more than 85% of students responded favorably to the school climate and teacher and school support questions, meaning that overall, a little more than 17 out of every 20 students, that's 17 out of 20 students, reported feeling supported by the teachers and school staff and reported perceiving a positive school climate. Secondly, about 15 out of 20 students, and that's 3 out of every 4 students, reported favorable social cultural awareness and that their teachers had rigorous expectations of them. Lastly, only a little more than half of the students reported being engaged. And this is not surprising at all, as these results echo what students, parents, and teachers reported at the end of the 2020 academic year. These results are broken down by site. You have the 5 scales as columns, and you have all the sites as rows. The first 11 rows are results from students in elementary schools, including BOS Elementary. And the last 4 rows are results from students in middle schools, including BOS Middle. Looking at middle school students, school climate, social cultural awareness, and teacher school support are on the higher and positive ratings. Regular expectations are slightly lower, but engagement is much lower than the district's average. We're talking about 1/3 of students reporting being engaged in comparison to half of the students for the whole district. On the other hand, 9 out of every 10 students reported favorable ratings of school climate. And 17 out of every 20 students reported feeling supported. Those are good results. Data for the elementary students look somewhat similar to the middle school students in the school climate, rigor expectations, and teacher and school support, with teacher and school support hovering around 91% of all elementary schools. That is 9 out of every 10 students are reported feeling supported by teacher school staff. Engagement and favorability ratings for these students were much higher than middle school, with almost 2/3 of students reporting being or feeling engaged. When looking at this data by racial and ethnic subgroups, there are small differences in favorability ratings on teacher school support, school climate, and rigorous expectations between subgroups, with Hispanic students reporting higher favorability ratings of school climate and teacher school support. And Black students reported higher rigor expectations from their teachers. Again, the differences between subgroups on these 3 scales are fairly small. White students reported higher scores in social cultural awareness than other subgroups. And Black students reported higher engagement scores than all other subgroups. And those who identified with two or more racial or ethnic groups reported the smallest engagement ratings. For the next few slides, we'll look at the school climate questions by grade groups. Again, these are scales that are being used in the ZIP goals by sites. So we're going to focus a little bit on those questions. For grades K-2, remember that we're only looking at the data for 5 elementary schools that decided to collect this data. So that's Hillcrest, Normandale Hills, Olson, Ridgeview, and Westwood. Overall, students in K-2 reported about 78% favorability for school climate. Favorability for these schools are those that answered yes to the questions on your screen. So these answers range from 72% who reported a sense of belonging to 86% of students reporting being treated with respect. For students in grades 3 to 5, they reported an average of 86% of school climate questions, where students reported either agreeing or strongly agreeing about the statements that you see on your screen. Overall, only about 2% of students reported not being treated with respect from staff members, while 4.7% of students reported not feeling a sense of belonging to the school. Overall, students are reporting strongly agreeing to these statements of school climate. Lastly, in middle school, 9 out of every 10 students reporting a positive school climate. However, as you can tell from these graphs, there are a lot more agreement responses than strongly agreement responses, unlike the results from students from grades 3 to 5. So our focus and the work that we need to do ought to be in increasing those agreement responses to strongly agreement responses. So to close this presentation, the one feature that you're not able to see from the static graphs on the presentation is that, similarly to the GLDS, staff are able to filter these results by school, by grade group, by grade, by gender, race and ethnic group, special education status, and also learning group, so that staff members are able to see this data and do more digging on their own.
Thanks, Julio. Next, Julio is going to talk about IXL, and this was an example of research that has been shared with the research community nationally and has resulted in the district making a purchase. So Julio, take this one on.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dave. As you may know, the emergence of digital math tools as supplemental to core math curricula show promise in increasing math achievement on standardized tests. And this is mainly due to the increased amount of time students spend practicing math problems. And what we know from the researchers in this area is that the more practice students spend on math problems, the easier it is for students to develop automaticity in the execution of critical math procedures, which in turn limit the amount of mental effort that is needed for basic tasks or subtasks. With that in mind, we investigated in this research study whether the use of IXL, which is an interactive cloud-based math practice environment, reached predicted math growth scores in higher proportions than a statistically similar comparison group. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. In other words, we investigated whether the use of IXL had an effect on students' math performance. During the implementation that started in the middle of the 2019 school year, IXL math was used by students in grades 1 through 5 in one school in the district. Younger students tended to spend about 74% of their IXL time at school and about 26% at home. Students of the older grades tended to spend their IXL time closer to a 50-50 school-home balance. Now, students with at least 60 minutes of use were considered for this study as having fully utilized the IXL math intervention. And that's 60 minutes for the whole entire period of the year that they had IXL. Only about 4 students were excluded from the data because they did not spend more than 60 minutes on IXL. So we have about 268 that's going to be in our experimental group. The average amount of time that students spent on IXL were well above 200 minutes. And that varied by grade level, as you can tell. The median number of questions that were attempted were well above 500. So we can talk about kids really doing this and practicing. As mentioned before, we used a quasi-experimental approach to this analysis as well. So we used a statistical tool called propensity score matching to identify a control group from the pool of the 2019 elementary students across the district that did not participate in IXL. Matching variables that we used grade to make sure that everybody's at the same grade level, free and reduced lunch status, gender, race, ethnicity, LEP status, English language learning status, special education status, as well as baseline math scores. Now, before matching, all 7 aforementioned variables were statistically significantly different between the 2 groups. So for example, the average math score for the students in the IXL math group was statistically significantly higher than the average math score for the students in the non-IXL group. So that's all the students in the district. After we matched, using this propensity score analysis, no variables remained significant, meaning that these 2 groups were statistically similar and shared almost exactly the same demographic and baseline characteristics. So in comparison, in the previous example, the average math score for the students in the IXL group was not statistically different than the average math score for the students in the non-IXL group. So as you can see from the graphs, the propensity score distribution of the raw data, so this is all the students in who did not participate in IXL and those who did take the IXL, are not similar. After propensity score matching, the distributions of those who were in the IXL group and those who were matched in the non-IXL group is identical. So by using propensity score matching here, we were able to create and compare groups that were similar on those affirmation key characteristics. And this allows us to draw conclusions, statistical conclusions, without concern for baseline differences. With this data, for those in the control group, that is students who did not use an IXL during the school year, 51.1% of them hit their math growth target. On the other hand, 60.4% of those students who used IXL during the school year hit their math growth targets. That's a gain of 9.3% of students hitting their growth targets. And again, we only use data for students who participated only 60 minutes in IXL activities. Using a logistic regression, the results show that the log of the odds of a student hitting their projected growth target scores was positively associated to the participation in the IXL math intervention. So in other words, students who partook in the IXL math activities were more likely to achieve their predicted growth target scores than students who did not participate. In fact, the odds of the students who participated in the IXL math intervention were 1.67 times greater to meet their predicted target scores than the odds of a student who did not partake in the activities. And that's controlling for variables that you see on your screen. So in other words, the odds of a student hitting their math projected growth score targets increased by 67% for students who partook in the IXL math activities. Now, as Dave mentioned, we have shared these results with principals and leaders in the district, and we are happy to hear that IXL has now become one additional tool in our teachers' toolboxes. I turn it back to you, Dave.
Thanks, Julio. I'm just going to take a couple minutes to talk about the spring assessments. I think there's been quite a bit of concern about doing MCA testing during COVID. As far as I can see, there are three different possibilities that the state may go with for MCA. They have been experimenting with remote testing of the MCA, and they're going to let us know in February whether they're going to have a remote test for kids to take at home. I'm a little skeptical that the technical people at the state and the feds will allow this, because it won't be a secure test, and you won't know for sure who's doing the work. The second option would be all in person, where we will have students bussed in to take the assessment. I'm also quite skeptical about this unless COVID really goes down and we have rates for our students below 30. And so the third option, I think, is with the new Department of Education in Washington. I think it's possible that they will offer waivers again for states to waive state assessments. So we'll just have to wait and see which of those three options turns out to be true. The MAP assessment is going to be given this spring to students who are in distance learning in grades 1 through 5. And we will be able to show growth for students who took the fall test, and then we'll be able to offer information for getting started next fall with grouping of students, etc. So now we're glad to take any questions from the board.
Thank you, Dr. Heistad and Dr. Cesar. Wow, this presentation is just fascinating. And you get us all really, into that. Gotta have all, your brain in the right place to receive all that information and really process it. Thank you. This is very, very interesting. Okay, I think we have a lot of questions, and I don't know if our student representatives are still with us. Okay, now I get to see everyone. They're gone. Okay, I was gonna say they could ask questions as well, because I saw how they were really interested in that. Okay, let's start with Director Bennett.
Yes, thank you, doctors, for that great report. A lot of information to digest. I think my question is for Dr. Cesar. In the school climate survey questions, good news is, seems about 85 to 90% of students all agree or strongly agree with those statements. But I'm wondering if you have the breakdown based on race, and was there any difference in those questions? Like, for example, students of different races get along well at this school. Was there any differences between different racial groups who were answering those questions?
Yeah, so the differences weren't that large, to be honest. The differences between, in school climate specifically, between racial groups was about 6 points. Okay. And with Asians primarily on the lower side, and Hispanic students on the higher side. So there wasn't really that much variability, to be honest.
Okay, well, that's good. Is there any way you could send that to the board, just so, I don't know, I love crunching numbers and looking at all that stuff, and I think it'd just be nice to see all the variability in those numbers, but that's good that there's not a big, huge difference. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So the data are actually on the district hub. So what I will do is that I'm gonna reach out to John's team and say if that can be available to you. It's really nice because rather than having a static picture, you actually get to look at the filters and just really dig into the data. So okay. as long as they're able to provide that access, we'll be happy to share that with you.
That'll be great. Thank you very much. And thanks for all the hard work on this. This is a lot of, I can see you guys put a lot of time and effort in this, and it's valuable data. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Director Sorum.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, that was really interesting. I'm a real chart and graph guy myself. So Dr. Heisted, I'm just wondering if I can set up an appointment for about 4 hours in order to go through some of these again. And Julio, it was just fantastic to see this data, especially the SLEDs information. We've been trying to work on that for a long time to get how many have graduated after 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. And even as your data showed, after 14 years, and some people just took their time and left school, went to work, came back to school, but they got their degree. And so that's data that is available to see and could be encouraging to somebody. It took me a while to get through the University of St. Thomas and the University of Minnesota, but so I can fall into the middle category somewhere on there, but just to know and have these students, teachers, counselors, and everybody be aware that some of these students are a little bit slower learners and just need an incentive or impetus or something like that to get going in their secondary. And plus the Career and College Academy, having that career booth with all of our partners in there is very significant and important. But thank you so much, and we'll be talking to you again privately sometime, I'm sure.
Yeah, thanks, Director Sorum. Yeah, this model that we've used to look at BCCA, we can look at all sorts of college and career readiness programs now, and we can compare the results with a matched sample throughout the whole state. So now it took a couple years to get the data all together, but now we can really mine it. So yes, I'm glad. And I too was one of those that took over 10 years to finish my PhD. So I'm in with you.
Yeah, I do remember the time when I was finishing my master's degree and talking to Dr. Heistad and talking about this kind of data and thinking, oh, you know, I wish that we could know about this and that, you know, and a few years later it is out. So it's really nice. Director Olson.
I was just going to say, because you mentioned the students were looking fascinated with this, they did hear about these tests in our meeting beforehand with Molly Coyne, and she said that they would be taking the tests a few times a year, and that possibly teachers may give it as an assignment so that they make sure they have the time to take it, because they said they would have wanted to take it, but maybe they're just so overwhelmed right now and so busy, and that teachers might give it as an assignment to make sure they're not rushed through it to get accurate data. And as well as, she did say that the principals sent out emails asking the students to take the survey, but that they were going to reach out to other students and make sure to tell them themselves to encourage them to take it. So I think that's great, so that we can get a bigger sample.
Thanks, Director Olson. Yeah, we appreciate the fact that the principals are really making a high priority for social emotional learning. And Julio, how long does it take to fill out the assessment, the survey?
So the ones that we're talking about in the high school, it should take anywhere from 10-15 minutes. It's very short and they're very easy items. They're not very complicated.
Although there is an open-ended question on there too, so that might take a little bit more time.
Thank you. Director Starks.
So again, as my other colleagues have mentioned, thank you so much for this data. I'm going to ask a question related to the are we calling it GLEDS now? GLADS? I with my my other hat, my Minnesota PTA hat on, I have the opportunity to serve on the P20 committee. I don't know if that rings a bell for anyone here. And we started this last year, so January 2020, talking about the Educational Attainment Goal, the 2025. Commissioner Olson was there explaining the goals and what we needed to do as a state to reach that goal. And so we spent the last year talking about the education lifespan alignment. So talking all the way from birth all the way through adults, and where we can make progress for students in all of those areas, students and families and community and such. And a gentleman that's on that committee from the Minnesota Education Equity Partnership mentioned that if a student has 12 or more college credits when they leave high school, their college attainment is exponentially higher than those that don't. So when Dr. Cesar, you were bringing up the AP correlation, that a student that takes an AP course and their enrollment in college, I don't think it's college attainment necessarily. Am I correct? It's just the enrollment in college.
Actually, it was both. So one was enrollment in college and then the other was actually attainment.
Okay. So then I don't know who I'm directing this question to, if it's to you or to the principals in high school, but one of the questions that came up in the P20 conversations was, how are we set up as a system, as a school system, to encourage those AP courses, the college and the school courses, the honors courses, when sometimes as a system, we kind of box kids in by about 6th, 7th grade. And so what can we be doing at our Kennedy, our Jefferson, our BCCA that are allowing more students those opportunities to attain those credits and attain those APs, because we're seeing such a correlation between that and college attainment?
That's an excellent question, Director Starks. I think that's the question that we should be asking throughout the district. It's an equity question, and how can we avoid doing tracking that puts kids into kind of a box early on, and use our assessment information to encourage students to shoot for high goals and to attempt, some of these difficult classes. We do have a correlation not only with enrollment in college, but also in completion. So it is a big factor.
Go
Can
ahead.
I just ask, if I don't mean to put the principals on the spot, but if there's anything that they can share that they know we do well in this area, that's something that we can celebrate that's happening at Kennedy or Jefferson or BCCA?
You kind of put me on the spot, but I'll answer. I think the part that we're really excited about this school year is just, the upcoming registration season for us. And, what we've been able to kind of put together for our students to select on all the courses that are being offered. And then also taking the time to explain what do the course mean, how does it connect to a student's or a family's goals for their own students, for their future goals. As we know, both high schools offer many options, from concurrent to enrollment to AP courses to possible courses that are going to be offered in online format this next year. So taking all of that into consideration as far as what we offer. And then also we're super encouraging of students and families to reach out and to just ask us the questions. And we're taking the time to kind of explain, what does it mean? What's required? What's a course that they probably should check out before they take another course. One example that I can share is family reached out and asked about AP computer science course that's being offered the freshman level, and if that was the right course for their student, if they have prior experience with computer science or not. So we're having those conversations on a regular basis, especially now as we prepare for this season of registration. And it's an exciting time for a high school principal. This is really exciting time, especially when COVID is not around, because you really get that opportunity to show students and families the way and the opportunities that we continue to help design for them. So I hope that answers the question a little bit, but we can definitely have more conversations around it as needed.
Yeah, and Bloomington has so many options for the high schoolers when it comes to classes. There's so many different options. And I think it's also important, for a teacher to identify students and make recommendations, where a student might be thinking, oh, I'm going to move into this level class. It might be possible that the student is just ready to go into an AP class. So identifying and recruiting students is important too, at different levels, different ages after middle school. Director Bibi.
I was very encouraged to finally see the impact of the Bloomington Career and College Academy, and to see how that's actually helping to enhance the playing field for our students of color. I know that was part of the goal in having it. So it will be also interesting to see how that can grow and how students can become more involved in that, now that we have evidence to show that it really does help our students either move into more technical training, certificate training, or even on to more college classes. So thank you so much for putting this together. And I think too, the other thing that Les and I have discussed in the past is, about these preschools and who is preparing our students well, and preparing them to succeed from very early on. So putting that down on the paper, making it a visual, was just really, really wonderful. I really thank you for that. And I look forward to more of this information coming through to help us understand where our gaps are and how we can work with students starting very early on. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Director Beebe.
Yeah, and I have to agree that that was one of the questions that came up and kept coming several years ago in regards to the BCCA. How are we going to know that this is going to work? Where are we going to see the results of this? And when are we going to start seeing the results? So I'm glad we get this kind of information from you now, which is, more in detail. It's really good. I do have a question in relation to, so when we look at the students who are taking AP classes and where they go after that, the influence that those classes have on our students, I wanted to ask you, and I don't know, maybe Dr. Caesar knows, but have you possibly looked into other school districts, whether it's in Minnesota or outside of Minnesota, where they have included like ethnic studies or even heritage classes that are offered to our students? Has that also indicated a difference in even the AP language classes?
That's an excellent question. Julio, have you read any of the research on the topic?
Yeah, so as far as the research that I've seen, it's not fairly recent. So I am a little outdated on the research on it. But the research studies that I did read at the time, which is, I want to say about 3 years plus ago, they did seem a very strong impact on student engagement and school climate, and in turn, in graduation rates. Again, it wasn't a controlled experimental study. However, we are able to look at correlations, and we can say that there is some type of association of students who are partaking in these type of classes that are getting something out of it. And I can tell you also in firsthand, I visited a school in Minneapolis Public Schools where they were having a Heritage Day. And they had students from all grades, and a lot of folks who were new to the country, folks who have been in the EL path for a while. And you saw these students going up and making 5-10-minute presentations, and they were confident, they were extremely eloquent, and you saw how they lit up their faces. And not just their faces, but the family members that came to watch him. And you do saw that commentary and festivity of being able to share their experiences as they go. So again, a little outdated, but I hope to dive in a little more into research and bring back more evidence once I see we'll do that.
Of course, yeah, totally understand, especially because we currently don't offer this to our students, which I'm really looking forward to see this happening in our near future. I think it makes such a huge difference too in our students, as they look deeper into the roots of their identity. It really motivates you to, keep going. Thank you. Any other questions? I see 2 hands up, but I don't know if they are like old hands or current hands. Director Olson? That was an old one. Okay. Victor, baby. Okay. Good. No other questions? Good. Well, if you don't have anything else for us, thank you so much for being here tonight and for this wonderful report. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well done.
Thank you very much.
Good. Okay, so we're gonna move on to the next update, and for that we have the Special Education Information System update with Jennifer McIntyre, Executive Director of Special Education. Welcome.
Yes, thank you, Chair Corman, Superintendent Fujitaki, and school board members. It's Jennifer McIntyre, Executive Director of Student Services. And after the last presentation, I just don't even know I can compete. So I may just keep it very short for an update on our Special Education Information System as we move forward. As you can remember, we have met a couple of times at the school board to talk about our interest in looking at our Special Education Information System and the manner in which we bring information together from multiple sources as we make decisions and follow all of our state and federal guidelines for compliance. We have started all the way back in February of 2018 in coming to the school board to discuss our interest in looking at really streamlining and working towards systems that are efficient to reduce the amount of time our special educators were spending on paperwork, we're spending on organization of data, and really being able to have an efficient system developed and designed. I've been working closely with Executive Director Weiser in our technology department to really determine kind of next steps for us. Along the way, in the last couple of years that we've been meeting with the school board, we have talked to a local company called The Nerdery, and they came in and worked with us and helped us to kind of visualize where we can go with our information system. And then if you remember last spring, before we all were impacted with COVID, we had started to talk about bringing it to the legislative platform to discuss what would be some ways for us to really look at our overall steps in becoming efficient with our systems to thus reduce the amount of paperwork or time that's pulled away from direct services to students in special education. So since then, we've had quite a few things on our plate to kind of manage and design and developed with programming for students. And alongside that, we have kept going forward to look at this overall system because it does take up quite a bit of a time, as we've done time studies with our fabulous REA department who just presented, looking at how our special educators spend their time. And so this fall of the year, we brought to the school board a letter of intent to work with Instructive, which is a company that's very similar to Nerdery. In fact, they work closely together as well. And Instructive is working with us to say, how do we build out this information system so that we can bring our data components together and streamline some of the work for our special educators. A couple of pieces that have really pushed us in this direction. One, our State Department MDE has moved forward to shift from where we've been in compliance. So I'm sure in the past I've come to the school board to report on our compliance or our lack of, but actually it's been really good. We have a lot of compliance in the area of special education. Our teams do an outstanding job. It's been that way since I have been here. They've done an excellent job. I think Director Melby before me did a great job setting it up. But the State Department has moved from really that overarching look of compliance into a results-driven outcomes for students. We've been looking in the field of special education very closely at what types of outcomes do we see for our students within special education, and how do we really change the narrative or move that system so we can spend our time in designing interventions, reflecting on our data, our progress reporting, and being able to look at how do we target the needs of our students in special education to really get the outcomes that we are wanting to receive. We've started to see a shift, and our hope is as we design this efficient system, we will see more. We also finished that time study to find about 60% of the time our special education team spend on doing overall paperwork and required meetings. So that only leaves about 40% of the time that they provide direct instruction to students, which is not unique to Bloomington. It's pretty much that story across other school districts in Minnesota and quite frankly across the nation. And we continue to look at how do we build in these efficiencies, of course, always keeping our eye on our special education funding and our cross-subsidy funding. So as we have brought you on this journey with us since way back in the fall of 2018, and before that, and we've been working closely with the team with Superintendent Fujitaki. What our ultimate goal has been through all of this is to really look at how do we create efficient systems that allow teachers to spend more time with students and less time navigating through the due process compliance components. That is very important. It's an important component of it, but how do we balance that out with streamlining where our data, our information, and all of our reporting goes into a system that helps us to navigate that in a quicker, smoother manner, and also making it accessible to multiple staff who work with a single student so that we're all informed and have the information in one spot. We also have been looking at how do we continue to build our relationships with our community, our families, and really being able to get information out to families and get it into the hands of our families in a timely manner. Right now, often we receive families once a year for our annual individual education plan or IEP. We also will see them with progress reports, and sometimes we don't always have a face-to-face unless a parent or a staff member has requested to do that. So we're really wanting to kind of shore that up, or to really become much more transparent and in touch with our families on an ongoing basis with that ongoing progress, and making it more of a conversation than it is about paperwork, and about making sure that we have the compliance sides done. So in working together with our team at Instructive, we've been building out how do we look at a parent portal, how do we look at parent communication, and making sure information is shared in a manner in which it makes sense for families, for advocacy for their child, and for the kids that they're raising. So the last main point about looking at this, besides our integrated progress reporting system, which is the key to all of this, is how do we integrate our ongoing progress on the targets we've set for students, our goals and objectives, integrating that back in so staff can look at that and make decisions along the way, and have it in one system, so it's not in multiple systems where they have to go to look for it and pull it together. We can work within our school district systems that we have. Many of you are familiar with the hub. Many of you are familiar with our district data, which our tech department has developed, has done a fantastic job actually developing access to our data. How do we now do that along with our special education staff? And the last piece is just that efficiency of being able to increase the time our staff have with direct services for our students, alongside of us being to have that transparency in those communication lines with our families and our parents. So what I wanted to bring to you tonight is that our special education department, we've been talking about this. We will continue to have conversations about our special education information system. We fondly call it SEIS. And really working to lay that groundwork for what shifts does this make, not only in the way we collect data and utilize our web-based programs, but also how does this change our communication with one another and our communication with families. That is some systems or work that we'll do to change, because it will change the way that we hold, say, an IEP meeting, or the way that we will communicate information. So that's kind of down the road, but for right now, we're starting to have those conversations. And as we have brought staff in to look at the systems we're building and to try out some of the kind of protocols that have been built out, they're very excited about this and want to know when can we take the next steps. So with that, that's kind of a overview of Special Education Information System, SEIS, and the direction in which we're going next. Our hope is that we will have a busy spring in development and creating more protocols, protocols for us to try out and for us to look at, and then also to get our staff starting to use them going into the summer, and for sure going into the fall of next school year. So with that is the end of my report, but I will open it up to questions if anybody has questions.
Thank you. Director Beebe. Maybe I should have given you more time. Thanks.
Well, I'm sorry, I just am
Sorry.
having a little bit of technical difficulty here. So no, I'm really encouraged. I thought that this project might have gotten lost with all the COVID that was going on. So I'm really encouraged to see it coming forward, and also appreciate the aspects of the parent portal because of the engagement factor and the importance of that. So I know we had talked about the development of this, so that it might be something that we as a district then could be able to provide to other districts at a cost. Is that still in the works?
Thank you, Director Beebe. I as well am excited about the parent portal on a side note. So when I see that, I get excited to see what we could possibly do. But in regards to your secondary question, I think there have been some silver linings, I will say, through this time of the pandemic, and things that we have learned staying on this journey of special education information system. And where we have left it to right now is we really want to build a system that's going to be efficient and functional for our staff here in Bloomington, and really be effective within our community of Bloomington to serve our families. We want to really take that on and do it do it well. And when we get to the point that perhaps we're doing it well and we're seeing the outcomes that we're anticipating we're going to be able to see, I think at that point in time, we'll be at a place where we could probably discuss next steps. But for right now, the team that's been working together has really decided for our community within Bloomington, how do we build this and how do we build it so it's as effective as we want it to be within our community?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Director Sorum.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. This has been a long time of brewing, and I know when it first started with John Weiser, the tech department, Les, our superintendent, and you as we were getting ready to gear up for it. And just the fact that if we can reduce paperwork for some of the teachers so they can spend more time with the students, will that also enable us? I know every time we get into a software development program or something like that, we really need some additional staff, tech staff, or whatever it is to help get through all of this sort of stuff without having the teachers take time off or have them go through special development systems to do it. And I know John Weiser has been so helpful with it, and I can't remember who else was also doing some work on this. But then, like Director Beebe said, kind of went on pause, and then all of a sudden, we still want to do it, and we want to do it for ourselves. And yet, if there is the possibility of the state supplying us some grant money or whatever it is so that we can implement it metro-wide, statewide, or something like that, I mean, that would be beneficial to everybody.
Yep, I would agree, Director Sorum. It would be beneficial to everybody. One thing that our leadership team, or our team that has been talking about, that's been coming together with this, is we have sat with this, as you've pointed out, the last couple of years and discussed it and looked at it. And for us, it's a shift in a way that we've done business within special education that we all have really been talking about it and are excited about doing, and have started to lay some of that groundwork within our own departments, our own teams. Knowing that introducing this then to the next school district or to a neighboring school district, they then will have to wrestle with some of the same things that we have kind of in that change process, right? So they'll need to sit with it and say, oh, this is a different way to look at it, but yet we're going to achieve different outcomes, or outcomes closer to where we want to be with students and families. I think there will need to be that allowance to say if and when we introduce this to other school districts, there will need to be that time for them to process the change that will come with it. I feel like you had another question in there, Director Sorum, and I did not answer it. So,
well, just thanks to John and Les for doing so much. But the idea that oftentimes when we introduce some new software systems, the teacher has to take the time to do it rather than provide some complementary, supplementary staff to do some of that work so that the teacher can spend more time with the students.
Right. As we look at building this out, we definitely have tapped into our special education department for content knowledge, right? For content expertise on how we set up systems and how we build that out. We've been doing that work the last 2 years. So we have been tapping into it and tapping into perhaps our direct special education leadership team. Some of our supervisors, we've tapped into them for their content knowledge. Moving forward to put this into place, we will be looking at how do we do that for the first 2 years to get it up and going, because there will be professional development with it. There'll be training, there will be other components that'll go side by side, but nothing too far off from what we're actually doing already within our current web-based system that we're utilizing. It's just a new way to really look at outcomes first in place of the compliance side of things. So yes, I do think that there will be a piece where we'll have to put in place training and ongoing supports as folks are learning this shift for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? Doesn't seem like it. Thank you, Executive Director McIntyre.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Okay, our next update is the model movement for secondary schools. And we have Mrs. Hannah Hatch, who is the district's director of nursing and state's approved district COVID coordinator.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Corman and members of the board and viewing audience. Tonight, I will work with Nick Kelly and other presenters here to give you another update on COVID-19. Before we get started, I just want to let you know that we've all worked as a team really hard to put this slide deck together in order to be transparent and honest in where we are at currently, what we are thinking, the guidance we are getting, and what we are hearing from both Bloomington Public Health and the Minnesota Department of Health. I'm going to ask you to hold questions until every presenter is gone, as we have several people presenting in this update today, but we will get started here. First, I want to just explain to you how we have worked our COVID-19 response. So we do have two COVID-19 coordinators. Rick Kaufman and myself work as the district coordinators. Early last fall, each district in Minnesota was asked to designate coordinators through the district. What this means is we receive weekly updates from the Minnesota Department of Health. We also attend regular meetings when they're called for our regions and communicate with the regional coordinators at the Department of Health. We direct and communicate all COVID-19 information and changes. We manage biweekly testing and vaccination plans through the district, and we manage the contact tracing, data tracking, and communication throughout our district. Within Bloomington Public Schools, we also have a COVID-19 response team. This includes Superintendent Fujitaki, the COVID-19 coordinators, and Bloomington Public Health, mainly Nick Kelly, who works with us. Our team meets on a regular basis, and we continually seek guidance from the state and medical professionals. We've sought out different medical professionals within the community to talk with and get their opinion, along with working with Dr. Kelly and his team, and then the guidance from Minnesota Department of Health. On January 19th, last week, early childhood, pre-K, and kindergarten through second grade transitioned to full-time in-person learning, which was 5 days a week. We're happy to report that we had a smooth transition with adding additional mitigation strategies that the state had laid out in their plan. These included the biweekly COVID-19 testing for staff. We actually conducted our second round of COVID-19 testing for staff this morning, and we were able to test 292 staff members this morning. So as you can imagine, that's been a lot of work for our nurses in the schools and Rick Kaufman coordinating it, but we had a great turnout this morning and got a lot of our staff tested. We've also implemented the additional PPE with the face shields and face coverings. We're still working on figuring out the best face shields and how we can work with our staff to make those comfortable and safe during their teaching in the schools. And then our students have been in cohorts within their classroom and functioning in that way. Part of the mitigation strategies is doing that rolling start. So on February 1st, grades 3 through 5 students are prepared to return for in-person learning. And we will continue the same mitigation strategies listed above and expand our testing of COVID-19 to the 3 through 5 grade staff. I'm going to now turn it over to Dr. Nick Kelly to give you an update on vaccines.
Good evening, everybody. So Bloomington Public Health is proud to work with Bloomington Public Schools and supporting COVID response. So far, we've done 13 clinics. We have 3 more this week, and our priority has been focusing on staff working in 1A, which is largely healthcare providers, EMS providers. And through this process, we've been able to vaccinate quite a few members of the Bloomington Public School staff that are considered healthcare in that role. So either behavioral health, direct support, PCAs, or school nurses. And that's something that we're continuing to do this week. And as we continue to work through vaccinating the rest of our healthcare providers in Bloomington, Edina, and Richfield, we will start transitioning to additional groups as the state directs us, and look forward to vaccinating school staff at some point in the future, and know that the state is expanding that capacity. Most of us heard that announcement today of the capacity for 15,000 school staff later this week in St. Paul.
Great, thank you. We are now going to move on to talking through the secondary transition. So I just want to remind you that our COVID-19 response team that we reviewed earlier meets regularly, and we also meet with the secondary principals and staff to talk about where we are at within this transition. I'm happy to report to you that operationally, we are prepared to shift to a lesser restrictive model when it is safe for students and staff. With that, I also want to say that the decision to shift is based on a number of factors that we've reviewed in previous meetings, but primarily right now, we've been really paying close attention to Bloomington's COVID case rates. I'm going to hand it back to Nick Kelly to review the COVID-19 case rates specific to Bloomington.
So as Hannah said, we're monitoring the case rates very closely. So this graph, you can see it's the 7-day rolling average per 100,000 cases. And you can see that we've come down from an additional peak after we went down our quick slide post early January. And we saw a second peak, and we're going back down again. And there's a bit of variability in that. And the 7-day average gives us the most accurate where we're heading. But for most school decisions, we use a 14-day. And so I've put up there the kind of the 3 different numbers that we use and look at, and just to give you a little context for them. The number that we're using from a public health standpoint is our city-based data is 39.5 as of January 17th. The Hennepin County data they calculate, they do it once a week, and their last data set ends the week of January 11th, and that's at 45.2. In the state, the number that the state puts out for everybody to use, the county-based number is 40.99, ending on January 9th. And so you can see the little bit of bump we saw in our curve at the beginning of January is reflected a bit more in some of the state or the county data. Ours goes, we're on that downward trajectory again. And so we're looking forward to try and getting below that 30 or getting really close to that 30 number, where we would like to see that for a few weeks for secondary to be safer. One of the things we're also monitoring is the variants with COVID. And so earlier in January, the state announced that they detected 5 variants of the B117. That's often referred to as the variant that came out of the United Kingdom. That's where it was first detected. Today, the state announced that they detected the P1 variant. That is the variant that it's the first time we detected it in the United States. It's the variant that was first detected in Brazil, but we typically call them by their name, the P1 or the B117, to not stigmatize countries or places where things originated. These variants are more infectious, and so there's an increased transmission we see in these in the community, and that's one of the things we're monitoring. The CDC does project that we will see increased variants around the country impacting our community. So that's one of the things we're tracking and monitoring, which gives us a bit of concern with the COVID data and what's going on. The CDC projects that B117 variant will likely be the dominant strain of COVID circulating in the country sometime in March. And so knowing we have some of that variability right now with our case data, and we haven't hit those trends, it gives us a bit pause of recommending to move to secondary right now.
Thank you. So as Nick said, due to the unstable case rates and new variant strains of COVID-19, we are continuing to monitor those case rates closely and working to maintain transparency with our community. At this time, we do not feel it would be beneficial to set a return date for secondary. We do acknowledge that several school districts in the area have set dates as goals for a return date. We talked as a team and looked at Bloomington's data specifically in comparison to some of the cities around us. We were running higher than several of the cities around us. And we also talked with Nick Kelly regarding the variant strains that they are predicting will see a spike, and then looked at the fact that our current case rates have still not stabilized yet. At this time, because of that information, we did not want to throw out a date that we could not then in turn meet. So what we are recommending is that instead of throwing out a date for secondary to return, we continue to monitor all these factors very closely. As I said previously, we are ready operationally to move when the time is safe to move. So we are ready and prepared if that case data drops and it is stabilized and we can do so, we are prepared to do that. At this time, though, we're continuing to monitor for that. In the meantime, we do recommend implementing increased district supports for students in our secondary schools so that we can continue to support those students who are struggling and need it the most. I am going to actually turn it over to Olson Middle School Principal Tim Shivari to speak a little bit further into what some of those increased direct supports could look like.
Thank you, Hannah. I believe this slide is for Jennifer. Jennifer, perhaps you want to speak to the student supports for special education.
Sure, I can start there. Thank you, Tim. So for student supports within special education, we have been providing, we started off with one-to-one and bringing students in on a face-to-face as a one-to-one for direct services. And then we increased it to smaller groups of students in the fall of the year when we saw the spike, and Nick and Hannah gave us the guidance to pull back. We did, and we went back to a one-to-one or one-to-two scenario within special education. Now that we are seeing the numbers that have come down and really coming into the end of January, beginning of February, we are starting within special education to bring those groups back into particularly the secondary, middle school, and high school level. In the areas really looking for academic and behavioral mental health supports. How do we target those students and really look at the students who are having some difficulties engaging academically within a remote sense, and then also behavioral mental health services. We do continue to partner with mental health agencies in the community, and they also have been providing services in a remote manner, but they will also start to provide services in a face-to-face manner and work collaboratively with us, as well as the principals at each of the schools as we start to set that up in the buildings. And we will be adjusting the amount of services and location of services based on monitoring the overall case rates and talking to Nick and Hannah as we do that. I mean, just staying in touch with those case rates to bring our groups in larger or go back down to the one-to-one if we need to. So that's what we have within special education.
Thank you, Jennifer. Tim, do you want to speak to middle schools?
Yeah. Rick, if you could move to the, thank you. Tim Shivari, I'm the principal at Olson Middle School. So, the middle schools, we understand the need to bring students in to provide face-to-face services. If you recall, in the fall, we had plans at that time to do just that, just prior to our case rates going up, which prevented us from doing so. So we're in the process of retooling those plans from last fall to expand our existing interventions, specifically around providing face-to-face services to meet the current needs of our students under the given circumstances. The services for students are going to be based on academic and social emotional needs of kids. With that said, we will continue to do the interventions that we put in place back in the fall when we learned we would not be able to provide the face-to-face services that we had wanted to. And that's going to include our virtual mentor program, whereby we have each teacher meeting with and mentoring 2 students per teacher. We will continue to maintain our extended class time so that we can provide for those embedded office hours. This allows our teachers to have access to students essentially like they would after class. Once they finish their lessons, they can then ask if a student can stay after, provide extra help, things like that. And then our schools will continue to do the home visits that we do on a weekly basis to check in on families, to provide SEL services, to help with technology repair, Chromebooks, things like that. But at this time, we are retooling those plans that we had in the fall again to meet the needs of our kids so that we can expand the face-to-face services at the middle schools. And now,
Sorry.
I didn't know if Principal Akram wanted to speak at all to the high schools.
Yeah, as far as the high schools goes, very similar to the work of the middle schools. We're revisiting all the plans that we've had when we opened up our buildings to more of providing supports for students in the smaller groups. But like Hannah said, we've got plans in place, ready to shift to a lesser restrictive model as long as the case numbers get closer to 30 or below 30. But we are really looking at the data that we have right now for students' achievements and finding ways to think about how do we provide those supports at the high school level.
Great, thank you. That concludes our COVID-19 update for you this evening. I can take questions at this time.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Kelly. Any questions? Let's see the hands. Director Sorum. Director Sorum, your microphone is off.
Oh, good thing. I made a joke, but nobody heard it, so that's all right. This question is for Tim, Shibari, and Akram. If the home visits that we're doing, I think that's really impressive that secondary on occasion has to go out and visit some of the families at home. Is this a significant effort, or do teachers do it too, or is it primarily counselors and the dean and all that sort of stuff, people?
Well, thanks for the question, Director Sorum. It's primarily our support people, so our counselors, social workers, and those folks. As you know, our teachers are pretty busy throughout the day teaching students. So yeah, it's at the middle school level, it's the support staff, and they do a variety of things for our families. Those visits look different for each school, depending on the needs of the students and the capacity of the building.
Thank you. Director Olson.
I also wanted to bring my question to the principals. So I just happened to have gone to a workshop at the MSBA event, and one of it was moving the starting line, and they were talking about mental health services. And they were talking about how students are more open and relaxed when they're in a non-office setting. So if they're meeting in a more open and warm environment, that feels kind of normalizes it. So I'm wondering if you where they're meeting when they come to school, if they are meeting in an office type setting, because then I guess it feels more punitive, like being sent to the principal's office, than if, although probably not with you guys, but or if it's in a more relaxed environment.
Thank you, Director Olson. I'll speak for Olson Middle School, and I'm pretty sure this is the case at the other buildings. Given the concern, for safety for our students and the need for social distancing, we try to meet in the largest spaces possible. So we typically use our media centers and our cafeterias because they're open spaces with good airflow. So we're meeting in less formal spaces. We're not using offices.
Okay, Thank you. But yet they have privacy, I suppose, because there aren't other people around.
Okay, Director Starks.
So this is a question potentially for Ms. Hatch or Mr. Kaufman. So when you mentioned that operationally you're ready to go when case rates and numbers and such support it, what is the timeline of that operation? So let me give you an example. So in the past, when we have approved a movement model for elementary, it's taken somewhere in the ballpark of 3 weeks from the time we vote to the time that that goes into effect. Are we looking at that same timeline once COVID rates get low enough that it would take us about 3 weeks to operationalize, or can we do it quicker?
So Director Starks, thank you for the question. You know, I would use that as a ballpark only because I think we would, I know we would want to get a parent preference survey out to know how many students would be choosing the hybrid model and how many would stay in remote learning and the distance learning. And I won't speak for transportation. I think they used 3 weeks to get the routing up for elementary. I don't know if they would need a full 3 weeks to do the same for secondary now that they're operationalized. So I would think a 2 to 3 week is a ballpark for us to do that kind of work. Because there will be some final staffing work that the secondary schools will need to do.
Chair Corman, can I ask a follow-up?
Go ahead.
Is there any of that that could be done in advance so that we don't have to have that long timeline?
The hard part is it's the chicken and egg situation we've encountered each time we do a change to a learning model. And that is that in order for parents to make a decision, they need more information. And while we can certainly, and we have shared what the secondary model would look like, the middle school and the high school model would look like, I think they would want to dive deeper into that to make that decision. I think based again on the previous work we've done, parents really wait to see where that case count is before they make a decision. So we can certainly encourage it, but based on our past practice, we have found that we don't get a great return on parent preferences until they really know what date is there or what it all entails. And so those are two things that are always seem to be moving targets in some respects.
Director Beebe.
I have several questions. Today, again, I got a call from a parent, a family concerned about their secondary student, and parents crying out for something, some type of connection for their students to be in the schools, and wondering what creative measures are being done to make it work. And so that we don't have bumps in the road of, you know, getting emails from teachers about passing times, being crowded in the halls, classes not being large enough to hold students. I talked with an English teacher from Eden Prairie, who's a friend of mine. She said she has half of her class in her classroom while the other half is online. So she's teaching at one time, both the entire class, basically. And I'm wondering, what other creative things are we trying to come up with to give more face time? I've had, you know, parents send us emails about the small amount of teaching time, face time that they're getting even right now with the distance learning and how their kids have checked out. And that this can't keep going. Other reports of how students are failing. And, you know, what are we doing to help with those students? I'm very, very concerned about our secondary students. We get emails about mental health issues, and I am wanting to make sure that nobody falls through the cracks. And I did hear that there was a suicide in Minneapolis. And it very much brings it close to home that some of these kids may be getting more and more anxious, depressed. And if we only have 2 students per teacher being mentored, who's taking care of all these other kids that have great needs as well? I know I talked with Molly Coyne today, and she shared with me how they're going out to homes and they're bringing more than just, what they need to learn. There's very significant needs, but there's some families where it's not the socioeconomic issues that are facing them as much as the isolation issues. And I brought this up at the BSAC meeting today about the need for us to reach out with students to create a ripple effect of letting these kids know that they still are part of a whole and that they still belong to a school community, even though the isolation is hitting very, very hard. And I was out in my neighborhood just on Sunday where the weather was beautiful and talked with the neighbor. And, they're talking about the need for their children to get back in school. So it's real. And I know we have these case numbers, but there's still some creative things I think we could do. And I'm wondering what those things are and how are we going to bring that about so that it doesn't take much longer to get something going for these secondary students. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Beebe, and we agree with that. We do agree that we want to service our secondary students as best we can. And unfortunately, right now, we are still bound by some of the case numbers and the guidance from the Minnesota Department of Health. But I can tell you that we all met today as a team with the secondary principals to discuss ways to be creative and get students the help and support that they need. How can we be creative in having teachers be available to students and things like that? So as Tim and Akram presented, we are working on those plans. We have several different ideas and creativity going around how we can support these students and our highest need students. And we'll continue to work towards that and work towards broadening that out more for our students.
When will you be sharing that?
Director Beebe, say that again.
I was wondering when they will be presenting those ideas and sharing that.
I know we are going to meet as a team again to follow up with middle school and high school principals and review what plans are in place and what supports we can have along with special education plans for this week to meet around it. So I know that they're working really hard to quickly get that out and that can be shared, once there is a plan in place and something has been solidified.
Can I ask one more question?
Go ahead, Director Beebe.
My question is not for special ed. I hear a lot about special ed and bringing kids in for that, but I really don't think much is being addressed with the kids that are struggling with the isolation and who is doing the what do they call it? The check-ins and how those are going and what is the accountability like to, if you can't get a hold of a student through email or through phone, is there a home visit that then occurs?
Yeah, I can speak to that, Director Beebe. Yes, that's absolutely the case. If we're not able to get a hold of a student or a family via email or phone, we go out to the house and knock on the door and do a check-in to see what's going on, to check in on the family, on the student, see what the needs are. One of our highest priorities is ensuring that our kids stay engaged in school. So, you have engagement in the classroom and you have engagement in school. And when we see student attendance drop off, we get really concerned. And, some of the things that we do just to maybe fill out a little bit of your questions or answer a little bit of your questions. We have weekly meetings with our teacher teams. Now, one of the beauties of the middle school is we have teacher teams, and these teachers get together, multiple times a week to talk about students. So administration and counseling staff meet with those teams every week. to review the students that we have concerns about. The virtual mentoring program, the 2 students, those would be our most at-risk kids. That will represent about 100 kids that will have that mentoring piece. But then there's kids beyond that you spoke to that come up at these team meetings that then are vetted through administrative meetings with counselors. We determine what types of interventions families need, if any, and then we move forward from there. So we do have some of those. We have those pieces in place. And you mentioned the piece about connection to school, and we agree. A lot of kids are feeling the isolation. I know my kids are. And as much as we wish we could be in the building, we can't. But we do offer after-school programming, virtual after-school programming for kids through Galaxy. And I know in our building, we have quite a few staff who are doing after-school programs for kids, like things like anime club and cooking club and things like that, to try to get kids connected. We also see the concern about kids who are new to the district and new to the school and starting off in a distance learning setting. And so we have we have groups for kids who are new to try to connect them with each other as well. And you raised some very good questions and some good concerns.
Mr. Shivari, Mr. Rossman, I wonder if it might be helpful, because we were having students come in for learning supports before we shut down because of the case rates kind of were off the charts. We've slowly brought elementary students back, and I know the secondary principals have been talking about those types of learning supports of bringing more kids back in. So I think Director Beebe brings up some great points, and maybe we can address as what Ms. Hatch said, as we're ramping that up, what that might have looked like compared to last fall when students were coming into the learning supports. If you could speak to that.
Akram, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah. So the most important piece is, we're still, like Hannah said, we're still kind of firming up our plans, and really we want to make sure that different representatives are also a part of this conversation. I'm a high school principal at Kennedy High School, but Jason is not here in this meeting with me, even though we collaborate a lot. So I don't want to misspeak or anything like that. But yes, we care deeply about the students, and there are so many things happening in this environment that are encouraging as well. We've maintained consistency at schools level with our schedules, with the ways teachers are interacting with students, to us having several meetings on a weekly basis to identify students who are being successful and the students who are struggling in this environment. And there are several layers of supports happening at I know at both high school sites to intervene with students. And also the other encouraging piece is that there are activities happening right now, which is another positive thing happening in the students' lives, as well as some of the club activities that are happening. Like I attended a movie club night last Wednesday, and that's happening every other Wednesday. That's organized by students, and kids are gathering and virtually and are finding opportunities to connect. And as Tristan said earlier today, there are events planned to engage our students in, with the school environment to kind of keep us celebrating and thinking about school and coming together as a school community. So there are many things happening. I would be more than happy to spend time explaining more about, talking more about specifics. But I know for this presentation, that wasn't our intent, but there are a lot of efforts being put into place.
Thank you. Yeah, well, the isolation is real, no? And even though kids get to go see their friends here and there, whether it's 1, 2, 3, same group of friends that they might be able to see, or even by having those interactions through sports, it still feels different. So you're still at home, you're still doing online learning or distance learning, it's still hard. It's just not the same. They're exhausted, they're tired of the normal COVID, tiring,
situation that we're in, that we all feel, and it's not only the students, but also the teachers. So I think that the isolation is real. And I think what it's, at least for me, how I see it, it's most important thing is that our students can feel that they are being heard, that they're being listened to, that there is someone there who is truly caring about them beyond the academics, beyond that, you know. How are you doing? That just that question alone every single day. How are you doing? How are you feeling? So are we listening to our students? I'm sure you're doing all those kind of things in your buildings. Are you, I don't know, are you doing surveys to your students to know, have a better idea? How are they doing in general? How are they coping with certain situations? What do they need from us? What do they need from you, from your teachers? You know, what are the kind of things that they're really like looking forward to? And I think is that constant opening a space of listening. And I don't know if this is through advisory maybe, but we can, especially during this time, and especially during this time right now, this point of the school year, it's very, very hard. This is when a lot of students are giving up, and you can see it. You know, engagement, what engagement? What is that even, you know, when everybody's exhausted and just wanted to go back into that building. So let's get real, because what they really need is this social, emotional support beyond those numbers of the A's and the B's and that pressure. So anyway, Director Bennett.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Okay, so one of the benefits of setting a target date of when to return is because it allows all that operational stuff that Director Starks and Mr. Kaufman are talking about to happen. So if we were to set a date, say like March 1st, that we're returning hybrid for secondary, then administration could start surveying parents and start surveying staff to see if they decide to, if they wanted to come back or not, so that we would have a sense of who's coming back and who's not. So we wouldn't have to wait that 3 weeks of operationalizing the plan. And I think that's what a lot of districts are doing. They're setting dates. We were at our MSBA training last week, and one of the persons running the Zoom meeting asked us, you know, who we are, what district we're from, and what our learning models are. And pretty much every school board member said, well, they're in person for elementary, and they're hoping feedback in secondary by whatever, February 24th or something, but they have their date set. And for me, I think I'd rather us try to set a target date, and so we can get that operational stuff done. And if we were to say March 1st, but if we came up to the last week of February and we're looking at our case counts that they're still over 30 or that they're starting to trend up, then we could easily just reverse that and extend that out. Say, okay, we're not going to start on March 1st. We're going to have to delay. So I'm wondering if if the administration has any desire to do something like that, or does administration rather wait until we're under the 30 per 10,000 and then come to the school board with the resolution to open up secondary?
Superintendent?
Your mic's off.
Superintendent, your microphone is off.
Chair Corman, Director Beebe, thank you for your feedback. And we agree with your feedback about the need for student supports. And please be assured that administration is working hard on this thing. Given the time tonight, we don't want to go deep into all the things, but we would like to come at a next meeting to talk about what has already been done and what is being planned to be done. As far as setting a target date, please recall what Administrator Dr. Kelly said and Hannah Hatt said. There's a probability that there's going to be a spike at the end of February, maybe March, because of the variant, and that's a concern that we have. So, but we are studying this thing. We're not recommending that we set a target date right now. It's going to set expectations of people that we may not be able to fulfill. We also need to see COVID case rates stabilize It's been vibrating recently, and that's what Dr. Kelly predicts. It's going to continue to vibrate at this level. And we said that we would start to look at transitioning when we see a sustained downward trend in the COVID case rates. And right now it's been vibrating. So we're still monitoring the data. And if we see the data start to stabilize, as Dr. Kelly suggests, then we would be moving toward setting a target date.
Thank you. Director Starks.
Well, I kind of want to follow up on that idea from Director Bennett. So Edina schools, who I believe just met tonight, and probably Dr. Kelly, you were at that meeting. They are setting a target date of February 16th with conditions. So it's February 16th if there's been a downward trend in case rates for 4 weeks, case rates are below 30, and they can operationalize their staffing. So it's not a we're opening up on February 16th. It's we're opening up on February 16th if these things are true. And that's what I would really encourage and want Bloomington Public Schools to explore, because I don't think that setting a date is necessarily promising something beyond what we're capable of. We're all hearing the same information. But I think from, and being a secondary parent myself, I've got 3 kids, 1 in middle school and 2 in high school. And the conversations I've had with fellow parents, you know, secondary students have really understood all the way through that the importance of getting their kindergarten and 1st and 2nd grade counterparts into school was much more important than themselves. But we're now looking at, I just did the math, if we met again on February 8th, that's our next board meeting, if we've seen a trend of COVID cases go down, I'm just saying, let's say that's the example, we would not be able to operationalize opening until March 1st at the earliest. And so I'm thinking from a parent perspective, here I am standing here on January 25th, and my first date that my kids could potentially go back is March 1st. And then you just keep pushing that out. Now we're in the 3rd trimester for high school. Now we're nearing towards spring break, which is at the end of March. So the longer we don't set a goal, I think for me as a parent and my students, that they're just going to be like, forget it. All right, like what's the point in engaging in school if there isn't going to be the opportunity to come back together? And so I'm just sharing with my personal frustrations, but also frustrations that I've heard from other families. And when I see other school districts at least trying to set some sort of, we really want to do this. I feel like Bloomington Public Schools, and I know this is not intentional, but it almost feels like we're avoiding it until it becomes crystal clear for us. The other question I have is if we lower our standards, so if we say we're only going to bring, and I'm totally just making this up, 6th and 9th graders back. Those are the 2 secondary grades that have not physically ever been in their buildings before. Because Principal Osman, you talked about some social, emotional things that are happening. For my 10th grader, she's able to maintain those relationships from 9th grade. And she's had a lot of those interactions with her classmates and friends that she made last year. My 6th grader has not had an opportunity to create any of those relationships in person. And so there isn't that opportunity to continue those that his 7th and 8th grade counterparts have had. And so if we were to say, we're just going to bring in this group, do our numbers need to be below 30? Do we have to see case rates going down for several weeks? Like, is there anything that we can do, any carrot we can put out there that is not this standard that we've been holding on to since we started having these conversations in August?
Thank you, Director Starks. That's a great question. And I think what we really wanted to talk about today is that doing exactly that, is prioritizing getting some groups of students back in to be supported in person. And that's why we're working on a plan to expand our direct supports for our students in need. When we met today, we felt like we have really narrowed down who our students are in need of supports right now, who need help within the distance learning model, who need some more connection, and talked about multiple different ways that we could expand upon bringing larger groups of students back in a safe way with mitigation strategies with our staff to support them as we move forward in this. When we talk about bringing in full grades at a time, that would be considered more of a hybrid model. And so we do really want to look at our numbers and the state guidance for that. So we really have tried to look at the different things. We've talked a lot with Bloomington Public Health around it. And we take their guidance and we take the state's guidance on it. And what we're hearing right now is to really be cautious, to slow down, to continue to focus on our elementary schools and keep that operationally running, and then focus on how we can support our secondary students. Because although it would be great to say, let's aim for this date, part of the safe learning plan is also to have stability in those numbers. So if we're not seeing that, if we're seeing that variability a lot, and that's the prediction to continue seeing that, we didn't want to set a number that we felt, or a date that we felt like wouldn't be able to stabilize by that time. And so what we're doing is continually watching that, and we do want to set a return date as soon as we feel like that's safe. But I do think we're trying to do exactly what you're saying. We're trying to expand those direct supports for our students, and work with our secondary principals and staff to do that in a safe way and utilize our larger spaces, utilize our different timeframes and schedules so that we can get students in to have that connection more.
Thank you, Director Bibi.
I hear what you're saying, Hannah, and I really agree with Director Starks on this. Our community is looking for hope. They're looking for the fact that, yes, we're listening to them and we hear their pain. And we don't know what tomorrow's going to bring, but hope deferred makes the heart sick, literally. But a longing fulfilled brings life. And that's what they're looking for. There is despair out there. And if they knew that we were looking for something as a goal, and then if there were conditions on it and they understood that, which they have in the past, and then they have to wait for that, at least they have an understanding that we couldn't follow through because it didn't work the way we had hoped. But they're looking for us to lead them into a place where they can find hope. And I think we owe something to our community to let them know that we haven't turned a deaf ear. And by setting some kind of return goal, we give them that gift and that hope. So I understand that maybe we can't go back because the numbers aren't there. But you have to have a goal.
Dr. Bennett?
Yes, I'm getting back to the targeted services. I was wondering, what's the capacity for that, and how is that going to be done? Is it going to be like, okay, everyone at Kennedy who's failing 80% of their classes will get to come in for 2 hours a week to work on academics or something? Or is it going to be like, well, we only can bring in 20, so we need to find our 20 most needy students to bring in? So I don't know if you can speak to that a little more about what's the capacity, what that's going to look like. How many hours are we talking about them being able to come in? Is it like an hour a week, or is it like half day? Or so if someone could speak to that a little more clearly, that'd be awesome.
Definitely. Thank you. That's a great question. I'll get started and then maybe pass it off to Akram to speak a little bit more to that. But as far as the guidelines go, we've been encouraged not to set a number, because it's not about a magic number of students that can come in. It's how can we accommodate safely, given the current mitigation strategies, to keep both our students and staff safe. So when we talk about numbers, I don't have a specific number of how many students could come in. mitigation. It's largely dependent on the space we have within our schools that we can utilize, the staff we have coming in at specific times, how many students we can get in, and how we can get creative with it. So part of our conversation today was like Principal Shivari mentioned, can we utilize our cafeterias, our gyms, our large spaces to bring in a larger amount of students where they can be spaced out, and then we can service more students at a time. So we are having those conversations. Instead of giving a number, what I can tell you is that we would need to follow the mitigation strategies of the Safe Learning Plan when we bring them in for direct services. So what that means is our staff would need to be wearing face masks and face shields. Our students would need to be masked. They need to be 6 feet apart. And then we would probably try to limit meal times or times when the face masks need to be removed. But other than that, we would want to bring students in as we can to provide the direct services that they need. So I'm going to pass it off to Principal Osmond to just speak a little bit more to how that may look at his school.
Yeah, as far as the identification piece of who are the students, just to know on a daily basis and a weekly basis, we are keeping track of the students who and how they're doing, and then also identify the students that would need more supports and kind of not waiting to provide that support. But then in this case, and as we continue to firm up the plans, as a group moving forward, we will be ready to go as long as we can agree upon spaces and we can put all those mitigation pieces in place, and that's all in the works right now. So that's what I could share.
So when you say you're ready to go, so when are we anticipating this starting? Is it something that we're going to be starting this week, next week?
That's what we're meeting about. I believe Hannah Hatch had shared that. I don't have a date, but this team is meeting regularly, and as superintendent said, next opportunity we get to connect, we'll have a more specific information on what the date will look like as far as when we can get started to offer more supports.
Yeah, and I think I would speak to that as well. The plan would be that the next school board meeting, you would have a detailed description about what supports and finalized plans are in place to provide to these students. The other thing I want to mention is just that we are continually meeting, and when we originally met to discuss a date, and we got the feedback that we did from the state and from Bloomington Public Health about what we're realistically looking at and what we should be prepared for. We really wanted to shift and direct our energy and our time of our staff and our principals into how can we service our students here and now? How can we work with where we're at, with our numbers where we're at, and how can we invest that energy into that? So I know they have been working. I've seen several plans and creative ideas thrown out there, and we are working to really get this up and running as soon as we can.
Okay. Director Olson, you had your hand raised.
I don't know, because we've gone on from the conversation, but I just have to go back to if families are given a date when it sounds very, very likely that, or very unlikely that we'd be able to open, because it sounds likely that there will be a spike. I personally, I would think that there are people like me who would think that it would be easier to not have that taken away from them, to set a date and then have that taken away from them. That is just my opinion. So I'm thinking there might be other people who feel the same way.
Well, setting dates also implies, that there's an amount of energy and work preparation for staff members as well. And for the disruption of the students themselves, as they prepare, and if they end up going and then returning home, that's even more disruptive, in my opinion, and from my personal experience with my own students. But obviously, I respect what the rest of the board might be thinking about. Any superintendent, you were going to say something?
Yes. Chair Corman, you're right. We're having the same kind of conversations among leadership right now about the pros and cons, about how we move forward. One of the challenges that we recognize that the city's COVID case rates vary. Our neighboring districts are much lower than ours, and they can start talking about these transitions now. We're still up there, and we're waiting to see a downward trend in our rates, and it's not happening right now. We need to see that consistent downward trend. So even though we're having we're planning, we're having these conversations, and we want to start as soon as possible, and that is our plan.
And I think it's important that we continue to have those solid supports in place in the meantime.
Agreed.
Director Bennett, you can say something else?
Yes, as Director Starks was saying earlier, that if we wait till next meeting and we set a date, the earliest we could set it would be March 1st. So I'm wondering if in the next 2 weeks, if our numbers continue to decline, and it looks like we're going to be heading in positive direction, would administration be ready to give us a proposal at the next school board meeting to return March 1st instead of waiting until we're below 30 and then taking 3 weeks from then?
The COVID numbers should come out tomorrow. There'll be another set of data. We'll consult with Bloomington Public Health, Hannah Hatch, Rick Kaufman, our COVID coordinators, and we will consider what our options are from there. We need more data.
Okay, and I think part of the problem is that there's 2 weeks between meetings. So if there's something that looks like we could, set a target earlier than our school board meeting, could we have a special meeting so that we could approve a plan? Is that something that we could do?
Sure.
Okay.
Of course, yeah.
I'll consult with the chair. It's the chair's call whether to call a special meeting.
Of course, yeah. Yeah, because
Okay.
tomorrow we see a sudden drop, miraculous drop. You never know.
Well, because, there's many different, when we're looking at different numbers, we got the Minnesota Department of Health, which only goes through the 9th. But if you look at the University of Minnesota data that goes up to yesterday, it has Hennepin County at 28. So, and those historically have been, pretty similar once you get to the matching the date. So we're heading in the right direction. I just don't want to wait until we're below 30 and then say, okay, well, 3 weeks from now, we'll go ahead and start. Because then we're looking at after spring break, we're looking at April. So, I think from hearing from board colleagues here that, and the way the board has voted all year, that the board really wants to get, students in as soon as possible. We haven't always, been unanimous on that. I've voted against that several times, but the board as a whole has wanted to get our students back into school as soon as they possibly can. So I just really want to not waste any time. And as soon as we're below 30, if it's on a Friday, we're below 30, we should be able to start on Monday. That's kind of what my preference would be.
I think I just want to speak to that as well as a reminder in that all along the state plan has called for stability and consistency. And so we never have been able to jump as soon as it just drops, because what we're seeing right now is a lot of variability in it. So we may see it drop below 30 and then be back up. What we are called to do is watch it and have that consistent downward trend, as Superintendent Fujitaki spoke to. So like you're saying, if we do see the numbers drop suddenly and we are expecting that trend, and when we talk to the state and Bloomington Public Health, they're continuing to predict that trend, then of course we will jump on that and want to get students back as soon as possible. But just a reminder, what we are seeing right now is that variability where it's jumping up and down, up and down, up and down. And so we have to be consistent. And the reason it calls for consistency is we don't want it to hit 29 and send all our secondary back to school. And then when the next numbers come out, it's back up at 40. We want to make sure we are on the right track and following that trend.
Mm-hmm. And I think we will all agree that what we all want is the kids to go back, of course, but we've got to look into safety and consistency, definitely. So thank you. And anything else, administration, in this update?
No? Okay, well, then this is the end of it. Thank you very much to all presenters tonight, and thank you, Dr. Kelly, for being here with us tonight. Okay, so let's move quickly here. Board member reports. Anybody has any reports that you're eager to share? Director Steiger.
I would just like to suggest that unless it's something that is time sensitive that they need to announce and for something in the next 2 weeks, could we pass on those and move on to the superintendent's report?
We're all good with that? It looks like, right? Okay, so let's go to superintendent's report. Superintendent Fujitaki.
Okay. I'll be brief. I want to tell the public that we're looking forward to welcoming back our grades 3 to 5 students on Monday, February 1st. Second, the Bloomington Chief of Police, Jeff Potts, will be retiring at the end of this week. After serving Bloomington for over 29 years, he has been the chief for the past 12 years. And on behalf of all of us, we thank him for his support of our school district and our school community. We wish him well as he starts a new chapter in his professional career as the Executive Director of the Minnesota Chief of Police Association. And finally, there's a professional development session for the school board on Wednesday, January 27th at 6 p.m. The PD topic is communications. And that concludes my report, Chair Corman. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent. Any other business? No? Okay, so it's time for adjournment, and I'd like to move adjourning of the meeting. Is there a second?
Second, Steigoff.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye. Director Beebe?
Aye.
Director Bennett?
Aye.
Director Olson?
Aye.
Director Sorum?
Aye.
Director Steigoff?
Aye.
Director Starks?
Aye.
And Corman, aye. And this meeting is adjourned now. You can find a place here to hit it. Thank you, BCTV. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.